hard conversation with a stranger because I don't want to tell them like, dude, I'm really just wearing a hat for fashion because the colors match what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
I got this. The Steelers, this Pittsburgh Steelers hat that I wear, and they match the Steelers colors are black and gold, black and yellow, whatever. And yeah, I got these black and yellow Jordans. This one guy, he just came up to me and he just started going in like, yeah, man. So what do you think? They just picked up Justin so and so. I guess the Bears' previous starting quarterback just got traded to Pittsburgh, Justin Fields or something. And man, I know nothing about Justin Fields. I don't know if he's a good player. If I don't know. I don't know. I just have no idea. He's like, yeah, man, Justin Fields, man. What do you think? What do you think they're gonna do this year? And da, 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 da. And I'm like, yeah, that Justin Fields is something else.
You just went with it.
Yeah,
That's
I just went
hilarious.
with it, man, and I try to like divert to something I know because like I'm being honest, like before I think I might have told you this too, like but before like when the league just got so political and the kneeling and the Colin Kaepernick stuff, that's when I really stopped watching football. But I used to be like a die hard football fan. I could tell you college, NFL, player personnel, like I was all in, man. And I haven't watched football in years, and like I'm just completely lost. Like I don't know anything of what's going on sports wise, especially like with the NFL. So I just kind of diverted the conversation back to something I knew, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I actually, man, I was a big time Baltimore Ravens fan, so I diverted to that. I was like, yeah, man, the Ed Reed, Ray Lewis Ravens were like, one of my favorite teams back then, and of course, them being in the AFC North, though, those are like at the time, Steelers and the Ravens were big time rivals, and blah blah blah, and Terrell Suggs and Ray Lewis, and
Yeah.
so I just diverted the conversation to that.
There you go.
And yeah, well, yeah, it's funny, man. Like, so you're a Yankees fan? Like, no, I just needed a blue hat one day, and I
how
tried
many
to get.
how many hats do you think you own?
Oh man, dude, a lot. A lot. I'm just looking over at some of them sitting right here. I'm to the point where now I'm like running out of room. I'm probably gonna, I got hats that I don't even wear anymore that I need to just throw out. But
I'm looking around
yeah,
too. I'm trying to find a notepad before we get into our conversation.
yeah,
Because I don't know. We've been trying to plan something for a while now. So
mhm.
the fact that we finally get to sit down, I kind of am a bit embarrassed because it's like, where do we even begin? You know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's just so much that we have to talk about. But I won't keep you too long. So
Right.
I think this will do. Found something. All right. So you weren't with us on this past Sunday. You were celebrating your anniversary. Happy anniversary, by the way.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
We were actually talking, and I think either me or Chuck asked, like, didn't or me or Blanche asked, didn't Chuck just have an anniversary like 6 months ago? Has it already been a year?
Right. I'm trying to remember what happened 6 months ago.
Time
Uh,
flies.
I'm
Unless
trying to
y'all had a
remember.
wedding and then renewed your vows 6 months later.
No, I may have been. I'm trying to remember what it was. What do we do? Six wasn't an anniversary. It was something. Trying to remember. Cause like my wife, she, back in March is like she's like big on March because or no, is it March or so February? So she remembers the day we met and like I guess like a month later, like I asked her to be my girlfriend or whatever, like in March. So in her mind, like is it March? What is it, March 3rd or March 4th? Something like that. Like that's like we don't celebrate it, but she'll like bring it up, like, so you know what today is, right? And I'm like, I play it off like I don't know what she's talking about just to get on her nerves. Like, no,
Nice.
what is it? That's the day you asked me to. I wanted to be your girlfriend. You don't remember? And I'm like, oh yeah, 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 I do. But I don't know what it
Somebody
was.
uh,
Significant.
somebody said that my sound is low. I moved the microphone closer to my mouth, so please let me know in the comment section if my sound is still low or not. Hopefully, my maneuvering the mic helped it. I see Leatherface in the comments. I see Manuel Luna in the comments. Average person in the comments. Thank y'all for joining us on this Saturday afternoon live. Um, okay, so let's get on into it. Hopefully, I don't see anybody responding yet to whether my audio is low or not. I might have to pull out my phone real quick and check on YouTube. Bear with me real quick, Chuck.
Yep.
Come on. Bear with me real quick, Chuck.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. Okay, so you weren't with us this past Sunday, and we had a conversation about this whole concept of ethnic collectivism, otherwise known as, POCs need to come together,
Mhm.
POC solidarity, which is a Marxist term. So we went into that, and I think the conversation would have been better if you were there, just because of your depth of knowledge as it relates to the history of cultural Marxism and ideological subversion. But I think it was a decent conversation, even still, with the four of us who were there. Crystal Jenkins, as you know, stepped in for you, and there was a point in the conversation, kind of close to the end, where I pushed back a little bit against what I believe to be this kind of thing that's typical of conversations surrounding immigration, surrounding other cultures, where, in my opinion, these conversations kind of lose their credibility when they kind of veer off into this kind of mocking tone of other cultures. And I don't feel like I did that great of a job articulating where I was coming from. But you did have a chance to go back and listen to that portion in question. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts were, well, what really struck out at me, and I was like, wow, that this can really be, like a springboard for a very deep conversation, and it really, for me, I mean, not to sound like selfish or self-centered in any way, but it really, brought to mind for me, this current project of sorts that I'm working on actually, and that is the question of just like culture and sort of like religion being, I don't want to say the backdrop, but really like an integral part of this of an ongoing kind of cultural process, and there's a ton of political and military consequences and so on and so forth, kind of wrapped up into it all. And something that you said struck out to me when you talked about, you used this term. You said, what was it? You used the term Christian culture. I'm trying to remember exactly the way you worded it and the way you said it. And you said, for me, you said something about not so much, can correct me at any point if I misconstrue what you said, but you said something about not caring so much about like Americanism and American culture, and really and really kind of being about Christian culture. And so that begged the question for me, well, what exactly is Christian culture? I think that, when Keisha was making the point, she was talking about just with her with the neighbor and having the chickens and stuff in the yard. Um, I think that you understood what she meant. I think you understood where she was coming from. And I think you sort of use that as an opportunity to, I guess, say something that that has probably been on your mind for a while. You know what I mean? And that was sort of like the opportunity for you to really open up about it. And I don't know if that was the right moment for you to kind of, to make that point. But I do think on one level, I guess, just to kind of dumb it down a bit, I think you get it right, because I think that communities have a right to sort of determine what their neighbors can and cannot do, because of course there's a delicate a tug and pull, a push and pull between, individual liberty and some sense of social cohesion that defines or undergirds a community. And so, it isn't so much a question of, well, what should one be allowed to do on their property, with their property, how it affects their neighbor, and so on. I know I think you made a point. You said, well, if there is a common brotherhood, a common humanity centered around a mutual belief in Christ, well, then, these sort of petty differences, seemingly petty differences about, what one does on their property, in this particular case, as it pertains to one, letting their chickens roam around. uh I think, I think for me, there's a difficulty involved when we use such terms as, Christian culture, or um, yeah, just this kind of coming together, right, around that central theme that we are all sort of followers in Christ. I don't know if it's that simple, but I'm interested to hear you kind of maybe like address it further, or go into more detail about just kind of like what you meant when you sort of use the term Christian culture. I don't think that the question is really about so much about the chickens roaming around, because I think you understand, right? You know what I mean? You have a densely sort of packed, subdivision where, individual land parcels are relatively small in comparison to your more exurban or rural areas where people can have, free reign to kind of, do those sorts of things. And so it's not so much about that, but I kind of really, really want to pick your brain on what is your conception of Christian culture, and exactly like what would that look like in an ideal sense? You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah,
when I was like, whoa, I was like, okay, this is a good one.
yeah, and we'll get into it. But before we do, I did want to give the audience a little context of what it is we're talking about, or the conversation that we're talking about. So, here's a clip from this past Sunday of what was said, and then what I responded to. Easy to kind of get into tribalism, and I don't really traffic in tribalism. I am a Christian first and foremost, and I know you two ladies are as well. So for me, it's like I believe that Christian culture trumps all. However, I know enough about the way the Black community was trending prior to integration. My apologies. I miss titled that. That was actually my response, but I wanted to show what I was responding to first. So bear with me real quick.
Okay.
This is a little embarrassing. Hold on. I don't think that the ones who are out protesting, calling themselves
I just found out that illegals that are coming over here, they're claiming refugee status. They're getting $2,000. Grown people, your tax dollars. No, no.
Like, I don't know, Chad, if it matters that, because I do believe that some people that come over here are entrepreneurial minded. But what I'm seeing in these first generation immigrants, the second and third generation immigrants, is what I agree with Keisha. They are disgusting. I mean, like seriously, and they're setting up shop and they're taking over and they're wanting everything to be basically Hispanic. And I get so frustrated because you want to invite people from different cultures over, but I mean, the very first thing that any kind of nation or group of people share is language. And the fact that you come over here and you insist on everything being in Spanish, it's the audacity for me. Like, how are we going to take hold of our culture if you won't even agree that, hey, we're not going to learn your language? Whatever you're going to get is what you're going to get in English. I mean, and so I do get very, very frustrated because they make you feel like you hate them, and I don't feel hate in my heart for them. I just don't want to go down this path because my children are American and I know what this means for them.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, they don't want to, and I know, again, I feel like I have to say this because I don't want it to be taken out of context. I know there are plenty of people who came over here legally, who respect America, who love America. They are waving the American flag, but it is a lot of people who will wave everything but an American flag and do not want to practice American culture. When we had these people who I'm pretty sure who were illegal, who had moved into this abandoned house, like they're fixing it up. It was not livable at the time. They got chickens running around. They got roosters cock a freaking doodle doing 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, we can't walk. The neighbors who have dogs, you can't walk their dogs because the chickens, they weren't caged. You know, so they're running around, the dog starts in, and now the dogs is barking, and it was a mess. So you come over here, you're not even respecting the culture. Do you see other people around here with chickens in their yard? No, you don't. Why are you like, what are you doing?
I think it's really easy to kind of get into tribalism. And I don't really traffic in tribalism. I am a Christian first and foremost. And I know you two ladies are as well. So for me, it's like, I believe that Christian culture trumps all. However, I know enough about the way the Black community was trending prior to integration and what happened during and after integration in terms of this kind of ideological shift that took place in so-called Black culture. And I think another thing that people don't really talk about a whole lot is the fact that as a result of the kind of self-indulgent piece of the civil rights movement and the free love movement and feminism, such and so forth, a lot of so-called educated Blacks began to have less children in the same way that most of Americans, white, brown, and yellow, started having less children. So while Black educated folks were having less children, the element of Black culture that was degenerate already were having more children because they were incentivized by welfare policies and such and so forth. That means a check or more money coming into them from the dole. And so when you see what happened in the 70s, as far as Black exploitation is concerned, all these things were picked up by this kind of influx of children who are coming out of these subsects of the degenerate element of Black culture. And so you have this increase of that kind of representation and this kind of decrease of the more educated block of the Black community. And I say that to say this: the more that was kind of shown as this is Black culture and it was popularized in media and such and so forth, a lot of Black folks began to internalize this identity such to where it caused a kind of repulsive or recoil effect in larger society, and rightly so. And so for me, it's like, I know that doesn't explain who I am. And so in the same way that somebody would be ignorant to lump me into a certain element of Black culture, so too would it be ignorant for me to say, oh, because somebody has chickens in their yard or because they listen to Mexican music or have a Mexican flag dangling from their whatever, that this, that, and that is true about them. I don't really find that to be helpful. I don't really find, I mean, yes, it's funny and it's, you know, it's all laughs and giggles, but at the end of the day, I can't sit here and say that racial or ethnic solidarity for the purpose of advancing Marxism is wrong and do so by saying, oh, look at this culture and look how they do that and look at that culture and look how they do that in this kind of mocking way, because to me, it's like I can make my point without mocking other cultures in this kind of tribalistic way that, in my personal opinion, kind of breeds and perpetuates this unnecessary beef that man has toward his neighbor. My purpose is to reconcile men with the gospel. And again, we cut up, we make fun. And I think that's honestly what you ladies were doing. So I'm not trying to like come for y'all or give y'all any smoke or anything like that. But I don't know. I think we have to be careful with these kinds of conversations. And on the one hand, saying, look, there's no problem with coming together, but we have to come together around the person of Christ. Because if we come together around any other thing, then it's all futile and it's all for nothing. And then when it comes to this idea of Americanism, I think a lot of people believe that we must come together around Americanism, which I think that's a conversation that's worth having. And I think that's kind of what the two of you were kind of getting at, that like, if you're going to come to America, you have to assimilate to our values, to our culture. I think that's kind of where you guys were getting at. But even with that, I personally, and I'm not going to try to tell you guys how to speak however you want. I'm just telling you like my struggle in my own head. When it comes to like, okay, you must assimilate to America, we have to be careful with that, to make sure that we're not veering off into kind of cult like territory that makes much of Americanism at the expense of making much of Christ. Because again, for me personally, I'm more concerned with God's kingdom than expanding America's kingdom. And I understand that like people that I know and who I'm close to, who do come from a Mexican heritage or an Indian heritage, I can recognize value in those backgrounds that gives way to family values, that gives way to respect for elders, that gives way for like, I'd rather, slaughter my own chickens and goats instead of going to the grocery store and pumping GMOs into my body. Like, I can understand different things that they're doing that I can learn from instead of, dismissing and making fun of. Okay, so hopefully, sorry for how long that was, those of you who are watching, but I just wanted to give everybody context as to what it is we're talking about. So a few things, and then I want to answer Chuck's question, which was, what is Christian culture? What is my perception of what Christian culture is? So you'll notice that I took kind of this long scenic route in order before I made my final point. And my final point being that when it comes to Americanism versus Christian culture, if I were to choose between the two, I would choose Christian culture. And part and parcel of furthering Christian culture or furthering, the Christian kingdom is to basically teach and speak in such a way that is reflective of the person of Christ. And if you are doing so, I don't know that there's a lot of room for senselessly mocking other people. And that's kind of where I was coming from. When I look at what a lot of people today would say, oh, this is Americanism, I think that there is a kind of unbridled, kind of unprincipled thing that happens, and you see this among the so-called MAGA crowd, where you don't have any real principles, you don't have any real kind of guiding force to where you do things and you say things that kind of feel like a cult, if you will. Now, am I voting for Trump? Yes. Am I a conservative? Yes. However, I wouldn't put myself in the same camp as a lot of these kind of like America First MAGA enthusiasts, because I feel like what they're doing or what they're attempting to do or what they're attempting to build is something that's not Christian, that is not of Christ, that is not of God. So that's a different story. We can get to that later on, but focusing or bringing it back to the matter at hand, when it comes to what is a Christian culture, a lot of verses come to mind for me. Number one, that we as believers are to be in the world, not of the world. I know I quote that all the time. That we are to be ambassadors for Christ is another one. If the world hates you, remember it hated me first is another one. On and on and on I can go. All of these verses basically pointing to the simple fact that God's kingdom is not of this world. And so we are but passers-by here. That doesn't mean that we disconnect, that we throw up our hands, that we retreat. No, we engage, but we engage for the purpose of spreading the gospel. And so, as I said in that clip, I do think that there's nothing wrong inherently with, cracking jokes, with this, that, and a third. But at the same time, there is a line that is that one who is seriously, or I'm sorry, there is a line that one who is serious about, advancing God's kingdom should not cross, because to do so would mean to basically ruin your message, ruin your witness in a sense. So I don't know. There's a lot I want to say, but I'm having a hard time basically putting it into words I want to put in order for it to make sense. But anyway, respond to any of that you wish.
Yeah, I watched it, and let me just say, Chad and I, we've joked privately in the past about, people who have discussions online, and like circle back and try and, like rehash it, try to air it out one more time because they didn't put their best foot forward the first time. But this, you know, I just I just said Chad would get a kick out of that because he remembers this conversation. So I just want to say that full disclosure, this was my idea because Chad did want my opinion, and I said, well, let's talk about it publicly. Let's do it publicly. So this was my idea. Chad more than likely probably would have just let it go. So you know, so this was me. And I watched it one time, I'm glad because I do remember you know quite well what I heard just listening to it again. Uh, I guess before I would kind of give my opinion, I guess I would ask you another question, Chad, as far as when you talk about this king God's kingdom not being of this world, when we're simply just passing by, right? Uh, with that being said, and I agree with that. But my question is, I guess, is what is the importance of or is other institutions, you know, man-made institutions, are they of any importance as it relates to the church, God's message, right? Which again, I think. Well, let me just say that I think that you know institutions you know, play a huge role, of course, in the establishment of culture. Now, whether we're talking, you know, whether you know our institutions are derives from our culture, or whether culture derives from institutions, and so on. Of course, you know, my understanding of culture, of course, you know, culture is sort of like the resting place, if you will. And I don't mean to use this term in a derogatory sense when I use the term mythology, because of course it implies that you know the Gospels, you know the Bible as a whole it's false, it's make believe. I simply use the term mythology, of course, because you know other societies that run, of course, contemporaneously with this one, and the ones that preceded us, of course, they had their own kind of spiritual understanding, right? Their own kind of cultures. So culture is sort of like the resting place of a society's mythology. It's mythos. And you know this, you know, culture is one of those things that are inescapable, right? I mean, because you know there has to be some sense of social cohesion amongst individuals for there to be a kind of collective, right? And so there needs to be a basic conception of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful and so on and so forth. And so my question is, going back, is are there other institutions, man-made institutions, that we talk about this whole, well, we are just human beings in passing? What importance do other institutions play in the kind of promoting and in the reinforcement and the passing down of the gospels that create this Christian culture? Does that make sense? I mean, you know.
Yeah. Well, let me just first say what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that it is wrong for Christians to set up institutions or to get at the head of certain institutions or to get at the head of certain governing bodies. That's not what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying um, is that you know most of us who are not in government, most of us who are not at the heads of industry, most of us who are not in these integral places, who just find ourselves um, doing mundane things, working 9 to 5 jobs. That's the overwhelming majority of us here in the United States who are Christians. I think that it's easy for us to kind of get swept away in the political conversation where we find ourselves waving a flag that represents one faction or another, one party or another, and we get so enamored of these conversations, we get so enamored of these movements that we lose sight of what our real purpose on this earth actually is. That's the point that I'm making. By saying that, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have institutions that are ran by or led by Christians. That's not what I'm saying at all. But again, the question for me is what exactly are you trying to build as a
Right.
Christian? From one Christian to another, what is it exactly that you're trying to build? And I feel that the goal of political parties has become a thing where each party is trying to build their ideal utopian society. Now, That might not be true of a lot of your politicians who are in office who are Republican, but it's certainly true of a lot of the um, individuals who are involved in grassroots level politics. It's certainly true of a lot of policymakers, so on and so forth. Um, I think we are a long way away from the kind of experiment that the founding fathers put forth, the experiment of self governance. We're a long way away from that because I think what they had in mind was actually quite simple. The sovereignty of the township, the sovereignty of the states, the sovereignty of the families. I think what they had in mind was actually quite simple. But because man have this kind of inclination, this kind of default uh, mag, magnetic kind of draw to being taken care of, and or to be enamored of a politician or a demagogue who says, "I will take care of you if you would only vote for me." Because that's the case and has been the case for a very long time in this country. I mean, it's the reason why FDR was elected 4 times. You know, it's the reason why the 20th century, excuse my language, was a shit show in terms of just this drawing nearer and nearer and nearer to socialism. And it's the very reason why in the latter 50 years we elected such persons as Jimmy Carter and Bill
Right.
Clinton and Barack Hussein Obama and Joseph Robinette Biden. Um, Again, I think we have this kind of desire to be taken care of, and that desire is exploited by politicians. And when we use our voices and share the same talking points as the extreme Republicans and the extreme Democrats, when we lend our voice to further their causes, it becomes clear to me that you are either knowingly or unknowingly assisting in the building of their utopian society. And in so doing, you're getting away from who you are supposed to be as a Christian in this foreign land. I
Right.
hope that makes sense.
No, no. I mean, I totally understand. I mean, it sounds to me like we're kind of moving into the topic or subtopic of just, um, just sort of being a Christian and understanding the point, the purpose, the message of the gospel, and how that it is antithetical to all of what these secular socialist collectivist types like to talk about. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. Even I think of listening to you, I think of something Alexis de Tocqueville said was a warning that he issued for Americans, considering the fact that the Enlightenment for many kind of marked the end, this kind of cutting off of the quote unquote Middle Ages, which was sort of defined by the authority. I mean, we're talking about the political, cultural, and governmental authority was defined by the authority of the church, and so everything sort of ran downstream from that. And so, from the kind of 17th, 18th century onward, right, we began to embrace these Renaissance principles and these Enlightenment principles, which kind of cut off this idea of an authoritarian structure that kind of dictated to the masses not only what how they should be and what they should think, but also their own kind of individual conceptions of what they thought God is, and how as human beings that they should relate to it. And of course, there are a lot of other factors involved when you're talking about the growth and the expansion of literacy coming by way of the invention of the printing press. And so a lot of things sort of began to change. And so de Tocqueville said that considering the fact that the whole of society is not going to be kind of socialized in one huge, a broad brush by some kind of overarching institution that has the authority sort of tradition on its side, now human beings could potentially, or potentially Americans, and to be more specific, are going to kind of give way to this kind of collectivist thinking that was made possible prior to the Enlightenment by way of church tradition in favor of this sort of democratic tyranny, this kind of tyranny of democracy, because human beings no matter how much we desire this notion of this kind of concept of individualism, human beings at the same time, considering the fact that we innately kind of require, some sense of kind of reinforcement, some kind of sort of social reinforcement, right? We still value and desire some sense of community. Human beings, and I've said this even in the past, that I think that the sort of explosion, if you will, of commercial. I'm going to use the term commercialism, and perhaps people may not understand what I mean when I use the term commercialism, because I think the concept of commercialism versus a kind of sense of duty came to define the kind of two separate hegemonic point of views that you saw embodied in the English moray versus the Germanic moray, which is what eventually led to the First World War. And so I think a lot of this kind of individualism that we talk about in the kind of cult of reason that came by way of enlightenment kind of worked against us in a sense, because I think human beings still sort of innately desire something, some kind of higher ideal that they can sacrifice for the purpose of the greater good. And so for me, this question of God and Christianity as human beings, I think that we as human beings, I mean, we're still ultimately kind of like the common denominator, and so a man will always be the problem, right? No matter if we're dealing with the question of salvation, the question of God, the question of Christ, or whether we're talking about something else. Uh, if you look at, for example, right before the Roman Republic fell, and the Roman Empire began, shortly before the birth of Christ, and in the fourth century, I think 330 A.D. was the exact year. That's when Eastern Rome was created, and the culture of the Eastern Romans, right? They had this belief that the Roman Empire was sort of predestined. It was God's providence that created the Roman Empire for the purpose of kind of disseminating the good news throughout the world, right? And kind of using the military and political force of the empire to kind of create this safe haven that could properly and adequately disseminate the message. Saint Anthony, the first patriarch of Constantinople, once said, and I want to get your take on this, that when it comes to church and an empire, that a church always sort of has to be backed by an empire. And his words were that a military is the handmaiden of both God and his church. And so how exactly can you be serious about Christianity and a church if you do not have an empire? And I'm not saying that he was right. I'm not saying he was wrong. I'm just simply putting this out there as filler so we can sort of unpack it. Because it's again, it kind of begs the question for me when you say Christian culture, what exactly do we mean? What exactly are we talking about? Because again, a lot of political intrigue and conflict and wars, even, for example, I think of the 30 Years' War between France and England, and of course the theological dispute between Catholics and Protestants, and so on and so forth. If we're going to use the term Christian culture, is that even something that we can say with any semblance of seriousness, when in fact there is no unified church, there is no unified hegemonic empire that kind of creates the context wherein the message of Christ can have this sort of homogenous kind of a top down thing. Well, of course, we do know that whenever power, whether we're talking about ecclesiastical power or political power, whatever the case, whenever power is concentrated in the hands of a few, of course, it has a tendency to corrupt. But at the same time, when there's this kind of negation from that, and all of a sudden you have everyone kind of running off and doing their own thing and running off in multiple directions, then that's again, I asked the question, well, who exactly is the standard bearer for this term or this concept of Christian culture, because you have so many different points of view on the Gospels, on the meaning of salvation. How does one become saved? How does one do? And so there's just so many different questions. And so we didn't like the medieval period when you had this kind of concentration of power, right? And then you had these successive waves of rebellions or attempts at reforming the medieval church, from the Bohemian Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, and then the English Reformation. Heck, even, I mean, and it's funny because when you talk about this question of Americanism and kind of placing primacy or putting Christian culture above this very concept of Americanism, I mean, in Great Britain, right, their Declaration of Rights, which led to the creation of their parliament, began as a religious dispute, of course, because King James II was a Catholic, and it kind of like it's this intra-familial squabble within the family of King James II. And this was, of course, led to what history refers to as the bloodless coup of 1688, which led to King James II's abdication of his throne, and then, of course, his daughter Mary and her husband William, as Protestants, ascended to the throne of England. And so, hence, William and Mary. And so this is when really, England kind of solidified itself, in the Anglican Church, right? The English speaking Christians of the world kind of solidified themselves that the English Empire would be the empire to spread the culture of Anglicanism, of course, which is, again, which is connected intricately to Christianity. And so, and again, this idea that, well, Great Britain didn't want a Catholic on the throne, also because they were very mindful and fearful of the fact that they believed that France was beginning to gain ground in Europe. And so France being a quote unquote Catholic empire versus the Protestant empire of the English. And so, and eventually, again, I know I'm being wordy, but I want to get, full context here, because I think, again, I think this is a very difficult question. It's a very interesting conversation, because if there is no unity in terms of, and of course, the nonconformists from the group of Protestants, they then broke away from the Church of England, and then all heck kind of broke loose, and then that would eventually spill over into the creation of the United States, because people were fleeing to the colonies for religious freedom and so on and so forth. And so if there is no kind of dominion of the church to say, well, you can't think this way, you can't branch off from the church, and you can't interpret the Bible like this, and you can't do this, and you can't say that. And we say, well, what gives so-and-so the right to sort of determine, right, this, that, or another thing? But then on the other side, right, when you have too many different interpretations, then what are we even talking about? I know you have brought up Martin Luther before, and of course, speaking, we always kind of come back to Dr. King, right? But of course, Dr. King's, father kind of really, really looked at the revolutionary example set forth by Martin Luther of the Protestant Reformation, as an example of what revolution can actually accomplish. And again, as point of fact, Karl Marx would have a similar sentiment or opinion of Martin Luther. That he literally said, a quote of Karl Marx was that Martin Luther was a part of the vanguard, because that Martin Luther was leading the way in terms of this rebuke of what Karl Marx termed medieval thoughtlessness. Okay, so we were beginning to go into this new phase, this new enlightenment, and so there was this dialectical process that was leading toward the eventual abolition of the church, because everybody was going to have their own separate opinion of what the Bible says and what Christian culture actually is. I mean, even now, when you see someone and they say, well, I attend church or I go to church, and it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the person, because you don't even know, right, if the church is doctrinally sound. You don't know what the pastor is teaching. You don't know who exactly they're listening to, because we talk about, even on Cutting Through the Culture, all the time, right, about how these Marxian ideas have infiltrated the church and so on and so forth. And so it doesn't even tell us anything about a person. And so again, it's difficult, right? I mean, you're talking empire versus more of a kind of like a do what thou wilt, and interpret the Bible, on your own accord. And so
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that that ultimately we as human beings, and I'll end it here. I don't know if we figured it out. I don't know if we'll ever figure it out. How exactly do we as human beings create this Christian culture? How do we reinforce it? How do we disseminate it in a way that, first of all, that is biblically sound, but also one that can kind of help maintain the church and as a result Christian culture in a way that is vibrant and healthy.
Yeah. No. I. So let me just first say that, like, full disclosure, I worship and gather along with my family at an Anglican church here in Texas. So we are part of the Anglican denomination. Um, the so whenever I advocate for a Christian culture, I'm doing so not on a basis of policy and regulation, but rather on a basis of praxis. Um, that is, on a peer to peer level, we are to live first and foremost for God. And then everything beyond that is to trickle down as a kind of, it's just to stream out of the fact that we are first and foremost devoting our lives to Christ. Um, and so whatever comes of that in the way of, um, policies and laws and legislation, let it be so. But again, I think it should start in the home. And so if it builds from there to the township, and then from there, like, if the majority of the people, the plurality of the people in the state are Christians, then again, um, that is, after all, the framework or the structure of our country, according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. Um, so, the you said a lot, and I'm trying to figure out which point I want to tackle first. Um, so whenever it comes to this idea of a Christian culture, I think you have to first and foremost take into consideration the governing context under which we live. Um, and so the fact is, we live in a country that has a First Amendment, uh, which means that it respects, or is supposed to respect, people's differences in background and culture and whatever the case may be, likes, dislikes. We have a freedom of association, as it were. And so this idea of having a freedom of association, a freedom of religion, is born out of the grievances that our forefathers had coming out of Europe, where they underwent severe religious persecution. And so the fact is, when they were here, uh, many of them had different denominations in terms of what they practiced. And so I think you made this point on a number of occasions, that it wasn't so much that, they wanted freedom of religion. Um, um, I forget exactly how you worded it, or I'm not even sure if it was you or if I heard this from someone else, but this whole concept of freedom of religion, what meant that the 13 colonies, all having a different dominant denomination that they practice, they are able to do so without any kind of interstate conflict. Did I get that from you or someone else?
You might have gotten it from somebody else. I understand. I may have said it, but I think you may have
Okay.
gotten it from somebody else.
Yeah, but you had
I
13
can't remember.
colonies, each of which, some shared the same denomination, predominant denomination. Others shared, Anyway, so um, we set up our governing system in such a way that you can practice your Protestant denomination without fear of having the hammer come down to you on you by the federal government. And so, what the atheists and secularists and humanists would later do is say, look, they were advocating for freedom of religion. Now let's take the second leg of this and advocate for freedom from religion. So in the same way that they were trying to get rid of Catholic uh, persecution and oppression, now we are trying to get rid of Protestant persecution and oppression, and we want to be
Right.
able to do what we will, like indulge and engage in the things that we wish to engage in. And the problem with that is, like, once you now start changing the hegemony of the country to where everybody has to now embrace your secular culture, your secular religion, it creates this kind of dysfunctional country in which we now find ourselves. And so now we're arguing over, okay, whose ideas, whose religion, whose worldview and ideology should be the dominant ideology of our society. Because I think what we're now realizing as a people is that there is no such thing as neutrality. There is no such thing as a country that, a live and let live kind of country. Like, somebody's worldview, somebody's ideology has to be the predominating kind of force or predominating hegemony, because it's either somebody's going to feel oppressed irrespective of what kind of system, what kind of society that you live in. And I feel that the only answer to such a equation is the gospel, is the Christian lifestyle. Because when you look at the early church, they weren't the predominating society. They found themselves in a world in which they were oppressed. And when you look at the epistles and how they were encouraged to keep heart and how they were encouraged to keep going and keep the faith, again, they were being advised in a context where they were being persecuted and oppressed. It isn't until much later that you begin to see different empires making religion, or making Christianity in particular, the official religion. And it's then when you get this kind of idea of, well, no, we have to make the church, make Christianity the predominating force, and if people break these laws, then we have to deal with them in a forthright way. So I know I'm all over the place in what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to remember all of
No,
the
I
points
get
that
it.
you made.
No, I get it.
And so then too, like, you asked me, so you talked
Because
about. Go ahead.
no, it's just again, because I guess my question and what I'm thinking about, and not just here, in the midst of us having this conversation, but this is something I've been thinking about for a while, is that again, it goes back to the sentiments of Saint Anthony, and it's the Christianity or Christian culture and the values contained within it. Um, is there, and the reason why I bring this up, because again, you talked about Americanism and everything that involves, maybe we could talk about that as well. um how much does the health, welfare, and vitality of the gospels, or I mean, again, I understand that the principles are separate from certain governing institutions as it relates to it. But what the strength of the state, the strength of the people who exist under its jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. Whether, and I mean, again, you just mentioned how it's different empires. Say, like, Rome in the fourth century would declare Christianity the official religion of the empire. Like I say, and as I mentioned, it was God's grace that created the empire to prepare the peoples of Rome for the coming of His Son. This was their belief, or it became their belief at some point. Um, is is there any kind of importance to those institutions, like the state, like the military and education, and everything involved that is separate from the church as an institution? Uh,
Well, I think
what happens when that society dies out? You know what I mean? Because you may have an enemy with a totally separate set of values that involve their spiritual conceptions as well. And even we saw, even with European imperialism in the late 15th century, how there, or at least they claim that their acts were fueled by their Christian conviction, because they would come into contact with these natives and saw them living in a way that they felt was an offense to Christ. Saw them living in ways that were an offense to their God. And so, what happens in a society of fallen men who will always come into conflict with one another, right? Based upon, again, from the chickens in the yard to different spiritual conceptions. Uh, how do we remedy that? And how important are those other institutions in terms of its the word of God and the message of the gospel? Is it important? Does it rely on the health of those other institutions at all, do you think?
Um, I think I understand your question. So when it comes to the, and it's actually a really good question if I'm understanding it correctly. Um, so you mentioned the church has to be backed by an empire, or at
Yeah.
least the
I
quote.
mean, yeah, this is a
And
quote I brought from
yeah,
St. Anthony of the ninth
from Saint
century.
Anthony.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
and is there a biblical backing for that? I wouldn't
Yeah,
say I wouldn't readily say yes. I will, however, say, you know, or echo what Paul said, which is, the government doesn't hold the sword for no reason. Like, and so I think that is the most that is the closest verse I can say to that in terms of, you know. Uh, this is going to be an issue for a lot of the libertarian folks, but I mean, it is what it is. Like, man has to be governed on the earth. They just have to be. Um,
right.
an anarchist society is not a society that you want to live in, regardless of how romanticized you and your ideology think it is. Like, no, it's not one that's conducive to life and liberty, which is the thing that a lot of libertarians love so much. An anarchist society will not give you that. And so for me, I would much rather live in a society where the laws are influenced and informed by a Christian worldview than of any other worldview. And so to that extent, um, I do believe that, when it comes to how you organize a society, whether at the local level all the way up to the federal level, that the best form of government is one where its laws are informed by a Christian worldview. So yes, I am
Well,
ready to
see,
say that.
right.
Um,
So that's my question. What
yeah,
is a Christian worldview? You get what I'm saying? Like, what is
yeah,
that? And the reason why I brought up all of those things is just to kind of give a brief historical summation of how human society, since the time of Christ, has been rife with so many different, conflicts
right.
that center around this very question. And so,
But here's my point, though. Here's my point. I don't mean to cut you off.
no, no, I'm
Um,
I'm just asking because I want to know. I
no,
want to
no.
know. What do you think?
In the 21st century, right? We
Mm.
have over 2,000 years of the rising and falling of different empires that had as its hegemonic undergird different ideologies, different worldviews, such and so forth. And so the question then becomes, which which societies guaranteed the most human flourishing, or yielded, I should say, the most human flourishing, the most prosperity and felicity, this, that, and the third. And so that I think is a question worth analyzing and looking into. But the point that you made is such an eloquent one and such a true one, which is, at the end of the day, these are governments that are still, at the end of the day, ran by men. And so even when you had your Roman Catholic, your predominantly Christian societies, you still had corrupt men who were overseeing these societies. Hold on real quick.
Gotcha.
Yeah, baby. What do you need? What do you need?
Let me come in.
Okay, go play then. No, no, you cannot play a tablet. You can play with your toys. You can play outside, but you're not playing with a tablet. Go. No, no, no. Hey, listen to me. I need you to be obedient. You need to go. You can play with your toys. You can play with your dolls. You can play outside, but you are not playing a tablet. But nothing. I'm thirsty. Go get some water if you're thirsty then. No, Elida, you need to listen. Go. I'm going to count to 3. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So where were we?
Uh, that's good stuff, man. That's good parenting right there. What we're talking about. We're talking about is the question that ultimately these are systems and societies that are run by men because we still
Yeah.
kind of put the word of the word of God. I'm trying to make sure that I'm trying to pick my words as carefully as I possibly can to make sure I convey the correct meaning of what I'm thinking. We're still kind of placing that the custodianship of the word of God in the hands of men. Uh,
Yeah.
and so, men are rife with ambition and all sorts of things, things that can corrupt them, things that can, I mean, there's just so much. And so I think you were making the point to say that, yeah, we've seen civilizations come, we've seen them go, we've seen them rise, we've seen them fall, and they're all kind of based upon separate, ideas. And as I use the term spiritual conceptions. So what do we, how can we kind of have any sense of a unified Christian culture when such a thing seems to be inevitable or insurmountable, or maybe it's not insurmountable. Again, I'm curious to get your take because I want to try to help
Yeah.
unpack these questions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, that's a good question. I think one of the things that these conversations are burdened by, and you can help me understand if I'm misunderstanding how you're interpreting what I'm saying. I think what they're burdened by is when we make a point, people tend to be prescribing a solution that is to be taken universally by all people if we're
Uh-huh.
going to have a better society, and that's not what I'm doing.
Right.
My
Okay.
my prescription is for those who identify as Christians. That look, you live in this society, this uber secular 21st century Western society, this Western context, and when it comes to which way must I go, I'm saying that you are to embrace a Christian culture with people who are like minded, and you know, because the thing is, and this is why I kind of go back to the early church and point out the fact that look, you didn't see
Early church.
Paul,
What early church? You mean okay? The time of
Book of
Paul. You mean
Acts,
like
yeah, hmm,
okay, Book of Acts. All right.
right. So you see the early church, and they weren't receiving instruction from Paul and Timothy and others to get into government, get into politics, get into this, get into that. Like no, they were being instructed to be the church, to be unified, to have unity with each other. And that unity is a perpetual theme throughout the New Testament. I wish that you would have unity. Jesus himself said, I wish that you would be one as I and the Father are one. And so
Mhm.
for me, it's like, I mean, I know you brought up that earlier because, you have so many different interpretations of the gospel. You have different denominations, this, that, and a third. And so, what does that even look like? Um, and I don't know. That's a question that I haven't really thought about because yes, I'm Anglican. I used to be
Mhm.
Presbyterian. I have friends who are Lutheran, friends who are Baptist, friends who are this, that, and the third. But we have a lot in common, and we don't beat each other over the head over our denominational differences. But one thing I can say is that we believe the same things in terms of family structure, in terms of you know, being protective men, not only in our homes but in our community. Like we believe a lot of the similar things, and again, a lot of this is birthed out of our biblical devotion, if you will. I'm hoping that makes sense.
Right.
But go ahead.
No, 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 no. It makes sense, and that's. I mean, you talked about, you're Anglican, of course. That I mean, there was I think I may have used this term earlier. There's a term, Anglicanism, which is this idea of a unified, Anglican culture. And of course, the spread of this Anglican culture. Even if we go back to the classical period, of course, I'm talking about classical Greece. I mean, perhaps maybe the first example in recorded history where, peoples believed that they could find a common thread that could sort of link a separate cultures together for the purpose of trying to find, the purpose of trying to discover uh, some sense of uniformity to kind of get beyond the veil of illusion to find something more based, to find something more fundamental, i.e., to discover man's true nature. So the point of discovering or trying to investigate differences among men was to find some sense of commonality so that they can discover his nature. And this became something that was sort of like uniquely synonymous with the Greek mind. And we use the term, Hellenism as a culture of the Greeks to understand this, because of course the in the Greek language they didn't refer to themselves as Greeks; they referred to themselves as Hellens, and so hence the term Hellenism. Well, Anglicanism would take on a certain sort of characteristic, and of course, the uniformity or some sense of uniform English or some kind of uniform Anglo-Saxon culture came, of course, at the end of a kind of ongoing conflicts that eventually led to England's unification. And the tribe, or I forgot the Anglais, or the Angles. I almost sound like I'm speaking Spanish. I forgot exactly how they they pronounce it, but yeah, and so just the English speaking or the Anglican speaking peoples, and contained within the language of a people, are a certain set of values, a certain subset of ideas. And so it's almost like you couldn't even imagine the spread of of Anglicanism, or Americanism. Americanism is sort of like the outgrowth of Anglicanism, of course, considering the fact that the United States, by and large, was, of course, formerly an English colony. And so, again, the spread of Anglican culture was the result of its empire's military annexations and conquests. And so, where does that leave the Anglican Church without an English empire? Uh, how does the Anglican Church even spread without the political, the intellectual, the whole cultural heritage and tradition? It almost sounds like Marxian in a way. I apologize because, of course, Marx and his whole historicism. Anyway, I don't want to unpack Marx right now. But without all of that preceded before the Christian doctrine even made its way into England. The English people brought with them still this kind of legacy, this culture, this history of and tradition. And so when they came into the knowledge of the gospel, yes, it had a huge impact on English culture, but there's still a ton of baggage, I guess, in the sense that they're sort of bringing with them. And I think you kind of see that wherever look at the globe, and certain peoples, who claim to be, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm Eastern Orthodox, or I'm this, I'm that, and so on and so forth. And so, again, without the totality of English culture, what is Anglicanism really? And then what does it mean to even have an Anglican church? And would the Anglican church today be the Anglican church without all of the other auxiliary pieces that define Anglican culture or Anglicanism as a whole? Where is the Anglican Church without the English Empire?
Well,
I mean, it, it's it's kind of like what do you mean? I don't know. It happened the way it happened, and so it's kind of like a hypothetical. But again, for the purpose of kind of projecting certain things out into the future, I mean, again, I think it's a worthwhile conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, the thing is, church history aside, from what I understand when it comes to the Anglican Church, today, um, this is certainly true of my church. It's a it is a liturgical church that makes much of the person of God in Christ and the Holy Spirit, and basically, and not only that, but that's not only true of the Anglican Church. That's true of a lot of conservative Lutheran churches, and again, Presbyterian churches, PCAs, and even a lot of Baptist churches. And so I think um, I don't know. I think that this conversation is kind of veering off into like, okay, which is the truest denomination? And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
But
no, no.
what is the
No, no, yeah, not so we can unpack because that's not even the conversation. I mean, of course, I'm gonna go wherever you going, but
mm-hmm,
yeah, it's not necessarily a conversation, and I'm ready to have. But yeah, that's what springs to mind when we brought up the whole issue of
Christian
conflict
culture?
amongst
Yeah.
individuals, right? In the
Mm-hmm,
question of Christian culture, because
mm-hmm,
conflict amongst individuals is one thing, but conflicts between whole nations, those we refer to those things as war.
mm-hmm.
And so whenever there is a conflict of values, oftentimes what we see when we look at history is that the value system that wins out, quote unquote, isn't always the one that makes the most sense when kind of like in a dialectical kind of synthesis, again, not to sound like a Marxist, but again, this is what Hegel and Marx, this is what they would believe, that you can kind of have this kind of meeting of the minds, and it's through this dialectical process that you would, eventually begin to unpack more and more of what is true, or at least something that is useful at the time until the next phase of conflict. And so when it comes to wars, wars are oftentimes started because there are different opinions as it relates to values. And a lot of times, the value system that becomes convention is oftentimes the values that win that conflict, values that sort of win that war. So how do you even establish any sort of Christian hegemony or any kind of value hegemony at all with their without there first being a resolution of some kind of conflict? And oftentimes those conflicts don't resolve themselves peacefully. They resolve themselves in war.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
No, I
saying?
hear.
So
I hear
what
you. Yeah.
so what exactly is again Christian culture? And again, I think in another way of asking the question is, what's the right church? What is the correct church?
No, I got
It's
you.
almost like, it's almost like it sounds the
Mm-hmm.
same. It sounds similar to that.
So here's what I was doing on Sunday, and just to kind of bring it back to like a micro anecdotal analogy. My saying what I said, even though I will admit I didn't articulate myself the best way that I should have, is similar to my saying to my children once they come of age and they're about to move out of my house, Dad, what should I do? What kind of person must I be? Should I go out and be a Republican or a Democrat? Should I be a libertarian? Should I be a conservative? Should I be a liberal? What say you? To which my response will be, go and make much of God. Go and wherever you find yourself, live out a life that is thankful to God for the fact that He saved you, that He's redeemed you. You belong to Him, therefore follow Him. That would be my voice. That would be my I guess advice to my own children, and it was my advice to those who were listening on Sunday night. And of course, you can get into the minutia and the intricacies of, well, which denomination and this that, and the third. And I think that's a worthwhile conversation. Don't get me wrong. I mean, church history and world history is actually very fascinating to me.
Yeah,
But I
it's
don't mean
very
to
cool.
convolute. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't mean to convolute though. The fact that at the end of the day, we have His Word. We have the Bible. We know what He commands of us, and the question now is, will I be obedient or won't I? And so for me, when you take that in juxtaposition to what does it mean to be a patriotic American. I think that in many ways, you can be a patriotic American and a Bible believing Christian. However, there's many instances when to be devoted to this idea of pledging one's allegiance to the greatness and the glory of America, that you are in a sense putting your faith on the back burner, as it were, especially when it comes to the fact that, in Christ we know that there's no longer slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile. We're all one in Christ Jesus. And so we know that God has come to save all of us who once were not a people, but now in Christ we are a people. And so what that means as far as where I'm sitting, and you can tell me if you see it differently or if you want to add to it, is that to the extent that I have a neighbor, Peter asked Christ, like, who is my neighbor, right? Your neighbor isn't only the Jew. Your neighbor isn't only the American. Your neighbor isn't only this person. And again, I understand that what I'm saying to some people might seem as, oh, Chad, you're for open borders. I'm not. I already established that on
I
numerous
know that's
occasions. If
why
you
I
don't,
did
yeah.
that. I did
um,
because I told you I said I know you understand at the base of it what
right.
Blanche, Keisha, and Crystal were trying to
Yeah.
say.
Right.
That's why I kind
Right.
of wanted to have a deeper conversation.
Right. Right.
I didn't want to talk about the chickens,
So the thing is like I feel that when we find ourselves engaged in political discussions, it's very, very easy to dehumanize and dismiss people because they belong to a certain culture. And I'll repent for being part of that in many ways, even on Cutting Through the Culture, where it's very easy to dismiss people and to dehumanize people. And at the end of the day, forget the fact that these are people who are made in the image of God. And that is why in my response on Sunday, I had mentioned a brief history of the kind of cultural shift in in the so-called black community, where you had a increase of children who were coming out of a certain subsect and a decrease of children that were coming out of a different subsect, and how this kind of cultural shift took place not only because of the who was and who wasn't having children, but also because of rhetoric that was coming from the civil rights movement, a shift in kind of pastoral devotion, so on and so forth. There's a lot of reasons as to why you had this cultural shift that took place. But an interesting piece about that is you had an increase of people from a subsect of black culture having children because they were incentivized by certain welfare policies that were coming down from the White House and out of Congress. And so they felt, okay, having more babies mean a check. And so they were having more babies. And of course, I have in the past criticized this narrative that, and I still do criticize this narrative that is the reason why, that's the thing that ruined the black family. I don't like, you'll never hear me say that. I feel like black people ruined the black family. It wasn't something the government did. However, people respond to policies. Policies are put forth and people respond to them. And to the extent that people respond to them, yes, it does create this kind of friction between tribes and between people, to where the anger, in my opinion, is misdirected. And so for me, it's like, in the same way that I can't be quick to throw a stone at somebody who is taking advantage of a welfare policy, so too can I not be quick to cast a stone at the immigrant who is claiming refugee status and is getting the $2,000 that is taxpayer money. Yes, that makes me feel some type of way, but at the end of the day, like, I do feel as if I'm crossing a certain line to when I kind of do this kind of wide casting of a critique, not necessarily a critique,
So,
but just a wide casting of a kind of mockery against people who are basically just responding to policies that our politicians put into place. I feel that the frustration should be more toward our politicians who put these policies in place, more so than the people who are taking advantage of them. Because I don't want to ruin my witness and feel as if, like, I'm coming from this kind of elitist place of the message that I have of the gospel is not for you because you have run afoul of immigration law, or you have run afoul of welfare law, or you have run afoul of X, Y, and Z. I feel like we have to rise to a higher level of being able to critique bad policies, critique bad ideas, without in the process, like basically throwing away large groups of people who are merely, just taking advantage of what's there. You know what I'm saying? Is there a time to, like, I do, and I also believe that there's a time and there's a season for everything. Yes, we have to speak firmly to people who are lazy. We have to speak firmly to people who are scoundrels and who, who are who try to cut corners in order to get ahead. We have to speak firmly to that. But I think, and I kept using the word discernment throughout the latter portion of the live, because I think that's what comes to mind. Yes, have discernment about what words come out of your mouth. Don't shy away from speaking firmly to the scoundrel or to the corner cutter, but at the same time, make sure you're not senselessly throwing people away who just so happen to be, you know what I mean, to look like the scoundrel or the corner cutter or whatever the case may be. I know I said a lot. Feel free to respond to whatever it is you wish to
And,
respond to.
and does your Christian, you as a Christian, is that, I mean, I know you always say that the Bible, of course, is your final arbiter, but everything that you just said, and as far as it's like how you address this issue of just this dismissal of the whole idea of a melting pot. I mean, because I mean, the United States is sort of like it's almost like the quintessential melting pot. Because becoming an American, not just from the standpoint of just saying, well, I'm an American citizen, but again, in principle, this was sort of like the ultimate cosmopolitan experience where the peoples who had a rightful claim, if you will, to define themselves as American weren't bound to the soil. This was sort of like the old way of viewing, nationhood, or sort of like how we would classically define a civilization. We would define it through peoples and their connection to the land. Blood and soil, of course, was the old moniker. And so now we have this situation to where, of course, we are being told that American values are inherently racist and oppressive and such and so forth. And so not only is this a message that is being disseminated domestically, but of course, this whole a mode of thinking is international in its scope. Of course, I don't have to tell you that. And so now that you have people who are coming here, particularly those coming, illegally, who, just to your point you just mentioned, who just simply see the United States as, the goose that laid the golden egg, not realizing that it takes a certain set of maintenance. There has to be some prerequisite in place that the United States didn't simply become what it is, because it just happened that way. You know what I mean? I mean, there has to be a certain prerequisites in place. And again, and that starts with the individual. We're at our own particular set of human capital, or intellectual I mean, all those things. I mean, it starts with the human being. Of course, it doesn't start with institutions. And so, because we have this problem, where our will and our sense of the fact that we are right, that we are this shining city on the hill, right? Because we're losing our sense of that, and we feel no need to defend, our values and our culture, and to say sort of like, what Blanche said last week, and I think a couple of people in the chat mentioned, I mean, and I know you're not saying this, right? You're not saying that there is something wrong or immoral by proclaiming I guess, for want of a better term, not to sound snobbish, but again, the fact that I even have to preface my words, you know what I mean, in an attempt not to offend is part and parcel of the problem. That, here we have a certain way in America that we go about doing things. And if you want to live here, then here's what you must do. But of course, Chad, uh, you know, uh, these socialism, not just socialist, economic socialism, but cultural socialism, philosophical socialism has now become sort of baked into the American pie. And now that is like becoming, right, a part of the American identity. And so it is something that, people like you and I are trying to get rid of that, to try to push back against that. And so I know that you acknowledge the fact that we can't just have this waywardness where people just feel as though they can do whatever they want to do. And I guess again, my question was going to be, well, you said that there's a time, a reason, a season for everything, right? How do we address these issues of people who come and who aren't willing to conform? I mean, do we? And I know you said it's just when it comes off like just senseless mockery, then that's the problem for you. And I guess my question is like, is it an issue of tone? Is it an issue of, well, when is the right time to do it? Again, and to your point, are we even addressing our gripes and our issues to the correct people, right? I mean, as opposed to the person just coming to take advantage and reap the spoils. Maybe we should be upset with our representatives, and we are upset with them as well. All right, can you be upset with both? You know what I mean? I mean, what's the right way to go about it? So I think
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's a
Yeah,
lot
no, it
there.
is a lot. But yeah, I do think that we should be more um, we should be wiser when it comes to who we direct our grievances toward. I think we should be wiser with that. Again, because the thing is, I don't know, like when it comes to, hmm, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without putting like my own family on blast. Let me just say that, like growing up, there were relatives of mine who tended to be very like quick to speak um, when it comes to conflict, when it comes to things that they perceived as conflict, even though they weren't conflict, things that they perceived to be um, a harm to themselves, to their person, when really it wasn't. Nobody meant anything in any type of way, and these relatives still struggle with that to this very day, and it works kind of to their detriment. So they're not able to achieve what it is they wish to achieve because their own mouth gets them in trouble. Their own tongue gets them in trouble. Whereas with me, and I'm not trying to say I'm holier than anybody, but I think with me, because I am more of a conflict resolution type person, and two, when it comes to like customer service, like I own a business, when it comes to dealing with certain situations, I'm able to put out certain fires because you have to have wisdom and discernment with how you talk about things. Otherwise, your message is missed. And so, all I'm saying is, yes, it is correct to, um, for the sake of structure and stability in the place that you live, to correct errors when those errors occur. However, I can make that point without, in a sense, demeaning entire groups or swaths of people, because to do so, I'm alienating an entire message or entire group of people who would hear my message otherwise. So that's basically what I'm talking about. Like, use some discernment, use some wisdom with how you talk about these things. I'm against open borders. I'm against like senseless immigration policy. I'm against these things. But at the same time, as I said earlier, I mean, and not only that, we have people who follow us who are Hispanic and who are, what some who belong to some of these cultures that we're talking about. And to me, like, even though I know what certain people on the panel mean, even though I know that it's not their heart to demean or to alienate or to demonize, like, people get sensitive, and so it's like you have to navigate that wisely. It doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to be senseless or to be irresponsible, rhetorically irresponsible in that way. If people's feelings are hurt, I mean, and I say this at the same time, if people's feelings are hurt, um, even though you don't mean any harm, then so be it. You know, grow up, get over it, and understand like that. I don't know, like communication goes both ways. I would say. So I don't know. It's this line between not being senselessly, uh, uh, what's the word, provoking, and at the same time,
Provocative.
like, yeah, provocative. There you go. Not being senselessly provocative, and then at the same time, be mature enough to understand that even though so and so said X, Y, and Z, they're not necessarily trying to demonize you or try to make you feel some type of way. So I see both
Right.
sides of it, but I'm saying like
Right.
at the end of the day, we as Christians have to operate with some degree of wisdom, and I feel like certain little things intoxicate us from understanding that. And it is this kind of devotion to a myriad of things, most of which are bad, but there are some things that we can perceive as good, also intoxicating us from understanding that truth. And I think this devotion to Americanism is one of the things that can intoxicate us from understanding, like, okay, what is your cause on the earth as a Christian? You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, and that's how you get the whole MAGA, and I don't know.
Well,
This is one of those conversations that is difficult to have without, like, what I'm saying, without making somebody, because that's the thing. It's like I'm going to
well,
criticize the MAGA movement, and then somebody's going to come and say, "Oh, you're against Trump," and like, okay,
that's why.
but
That's why I said, man. I text you. I say, yeah, man, Chad, you may want to go live. That way you can, have a second crack at it, because at the same time, because I know you, and I know your heart. I know what some people heard, when in last week's show. It's like, well, Chad, oh man, we've lost Chad. He's went off the deep end. He supports open borders, right? He doesn't believe, and proper, public etiquette, decorum. He says that people should, be free to do, whatever. Your neighbors can, cause all sorts of blight and what have you, and then lower your property value, against your, and he's referencing Christianity as his. Christianity being a Christian as his point of reference. Well, what's going on with Chad? But I mean, I knew that there was more to it than that. Even when you bring up the MAGA crowd, I've had a ton of issues recently with the MAGA crowd, because I believe that the MAGA crowd has embraced too much of this populist sentiment. You've heard me talk about it a lot. Even my own individual YouTube channel. I have a huge problem with this populist sentiment. You talked about the America First crowd. Of course, those of us who are familiar with history know that the America First movement began in the 1930s, led by Charles Lindbergh. And it almost led to uh, not just the collapse of Europe, but perhaps the eventual collapse of the United States as well. And this was sort of like the populist movement of its day, right? This notion of an America first, and again, it's just like this question of Christian culture. When people say, "Well, America first," again, that notion of being America first means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But again, I think this with this whole question of Americanism, I guess I would ask you another question, is that what does Americanism mean exactly? Even when you hear people use terms such as God, family, country, right? um you know I don't even know if you can kind of neatly package that cliche there in some Bible verse or not, or perhaps that's just a popular cliche. I will admit that you know the Bible better than I do. But with the loss of Americanism, or this belief in in American strength and American hegemony and in American supremacy, um, does is there with that, with a kind of decrease in that and a greater emphasis on being Christian, do you see this kind of inverse correlation between the two, or are those two concepts codependent upon one another, right? This idea of a strong infrastructure, of a strong government, of a strong community, of strong people, of a strong economy, of a strong military, right? This whole notion of the rising tide. Does the church and does Christian sensibility also rise with that tide? And on the flip side of that, does Christian culture also go down when that tide goes down? You know what I mean? Does that at all make sense? It's almost like is again. I know I sound like a broken record, and you've probably addressed it a ton of different ways by now. But just the Christian culture, whether however you define Christian culture, whether it's the family, community, I think it can mean a lot of different things. Is it just off to the side, separate, apart from everything else, independent of everything else? Or does the strength of that Christian culture also codependent upon the strength of those other institutions as well? It's just because when we lose those things, what happens to the Christian culture and our ability as human beings to share in that, and to have fellowship in that fact that Christ died for our sins, and to disseminate the good news of
Well, let me say this.
you know
I would venture to say, and I'm willing to die on this hill, that most of your America First people, your MAGA populist Republicans, actually don't mind socialism. Now, they are conveniently demeaning socialism right now because they understand that that's what the left is trying to push, that that's what the Democrats are trying to push. But the reality of it, if Trump were to get in and he starts implementing socialist type policies, they won't recognize it as socialism and they will embrace it because it's America first, right? And so, like, you're talking about people who are unprincipled, who are populists, but they just so happen to be backing Donald Trump, who just so happens to be a Republican in this race. And so for me, it's like, again, like I see people in the comment section talking about MAGA, 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 and that's fine. Believe what you want to believe. I'm just telling you that a lot of this kind of America first MAGA rhetoric is not very principled. It is just a response or a reaction to the left and to what the Democrats are doing. So where I'm coming from is a principled belief system that's based in the Bible, is what I'm saying. And then another thing I wanted to address real quick is
I mean, there
this
are a
right
lot of
here.
questions. There are a lot of questions in the chat. I've just been ignoring them, but
No, no, you're
there's been a
good.
lot of
You're
questions in
good.
the chat.
I
A
wasn't
lot of
even
good
paying
ones. A lot
attention.
of good
I
ones.
was I wasn't even paying attention to the chat till just now. DT says wokeism has created a new culture of having to be overly preoccupied with tiptoeing around other people's feelings. Okay, first of all, that's not what I'm doing. I already said numerous times that my anchor is the Bible. It's the Bible. It is God that shapes how I see things and how I uh, basically uh, uh, to the extent that I don't want to senselessly go around being provocative and offending people. It's not wokeism has nothing to do with that. What Democrats or the left is doing has nothing to do with that. That's called wisdom. That's called discernment. That's being called slow to speak and quick to listen. That's what that's called. Wokeism has nothing to do with that at all. And so I'm not gonna let you give credit to wokeism when in reality is wisdom comes from God. And so again, like if you choose to be foolish and think to yourself, oh, Chad's for open borders, Chad is protecting or caping for immigrants, then
Right.
please go somewhere else. Like this isn't the life for you. But like you're sitting here being cognitively dissonant by trying to accuse me of doing something that I'm not doing. And again, I'm not offended by it, but it's like it's just foolish, for one. And then two, we have Pretty Lady here. She
The,
says,
the,
"Don't
the,
offend immigrants, but it's okay to offend legal Black Americans." It's like,
hold on, Chad. Before you address Pretty Lady, I think DT was just speaking in general. I don't know if they were directing that specifically at you. They were just speaking in general. I mean, the general
no, no,
sentiment
no,
of
hold
the,
on,
of the
no, no,
statement
no,
is
no, no,
correct, but
no, no,
I don't
no.
know.
No, no, no. So basically, when I said earlier, like that comment came in when I was talking about how it doesn't
Okay.
make sense to be senselessly provocative or to throw
That's when the statement
groups
was
of people
made. Okay.
away unnecessarily. So that's what that was in response to. And then
Hmm.
Pretty Liddy
Okay.
said, "Don't offend immigrants, but it's okay to offend legal Black Americans." It's like, okay, like, are we not listening this afternoon? Did you not hear me earlier say I repent for the times that I senselessly made fun of or mocked Black folks? Like, did you not hear me say that earlier? Again, it's
Yeah.
like, it's so again, like, I'm a human being. I'm a finite human being. I don't get it right all the time, and I acknowledge
Right.
that. And when I see, okay, I don't like this thing that we're doing, and then I go back and think about all the times that I myself have done that, and I repent for that. Like, for
Yeah.
you to keep throwing it in my face, like, whoa, it's okay to talk about Black folks, but it's not okay to talk about immigrants. Like, are we? Do we have our listening ears on today?
Right.
Like,
I
anyway,
think that this is a very, and leave it up to you and I. I mean, this conversation, and I know we've covered a lot, these conversations are very complex and they're very nuanced, and it does require a ton of unpacking and digging and deconstructing and breaking things down and explaining. Again, going through the chat, reading things, there are a lot of, misunderstandings, people asking questions, and I get it, right? It's a dialogue, it's a back and forth. Sometimes things get lost in translation. You may say something, you may make a point, someone may miss it, it may go over their head, or, and again, not to say that they are incapable intellectually of understanding it. Perhaps they may have misconstrued something or didn't quite hear something correctly. And so there's been a lot of good comments and a lot of good questions in the chat. But again, I think that this just speaks to how often we take things for granted, where we just go out and we just start talking, we just start saying things, not fully realizing um, just just all of the history and the heft and the weight that is contained within the words that we use that carry with them, right? Certain concepts that, again, I repeat, I think many of us have taken for granted, because for as much as we like to think of ourselves as being conservatives, again, I'm not the end all be all on what a conservative is. I won't say that. But I really don't think many of us, and I'm again not coming for anybody in the chat, not saying that this is directed at the majority of the people in the live chat, but I think there are a lot of people, not just on the internet, but just in the country by and large, who consider themselves to be conservatives, who don't really spend time uh, with themselves or with others, really asking some of these tough questions.
yeah.
Because again, it's not as easy as it seems, right? And the answers
Let
aren't just right there. You know what I mean? It again, you really have to listen and you really have to think, and you know what I mean. It's not
yeah.
it's not that simple.
And let me just say, like, when it comes to DT and Pretty Liddy, I know I seem heated, but the fact of the matter is, I'm not so much trying to come for y'all as much as it is this own. Like, it's really kind of it's really me, because I've always struggled since I was a kid with, like, being misunderstood, of not being able to come across or to articulate the point that I'm trying to make in a clear way. And so it's like, and so that's where that's coming from. You may not have been directing your comments toward me, and that's fine. If, like, even if you were, it's fine. Like, I'm a big boy, I can handle it. But it's like, again, my one of my biggest pet peeves or biggest frustrations, just not being able to, like, come across as clear as I want to. So so let
So,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, no, go ahead if you're going through more comments, because I wanted to ask you another question, or kind of make a comment slash question. But if you're still going through some of the questions, I know
Well,
one thing.
go ahead.
Someone in the comment section said that I had lost them when I was talking about Anglicanism and this idea of an Anglican empire. Um, the point that was trying to make, and one of the points that that I've been making in general is to say that, so I mean you hear this you hear people say that we talk about Western civilization, right? And I'm surprised we neither one of us have used this term thus far, because Western civilization encapsulates a ton of things. What the Western civilization encapsulates, the pre-Christian era, right, of pagan Rome and pagan Greece. Western civilization means a lot of things. Okay, we hear, people define it this way, and as a matter of fact, I have it right here in my notes as I prepare for my next YouTube upload. I'll just say right here what I wrote down in my notes. I said the West is a tripartite synthesis of Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. That is, our philosophic and political thought derives from that of the ancient Greeks. Our Christian faith comes from the Jewish religion, and both systems were transmitted down to us vis-a-vis the Roman Empire. And so when I say, again, when we talk about Western civilization, um, there are a lot of moving parts that allow for the dissemination of ideas, whether we're talking about, again, wars, conflict, imperial domination, certain technological inventions that made for better or easier communication. We brought up the invention of the printing press earlier. Today we have the internet, and so on and so forth. And so when I mentioned the fact that Anglicanism being like this huge, the kind of like the English speaking, right? We kind of moved away from the Latin, right, because people couldn't speak it. And so when we began to print, holy literature, sacred literature in English, right, the kind of the English speaking Christian world, the Anglican world, right, you can't imagine, particularly the Anglican sensibilities making their way across the Atlantic. You can't imagine that without the empire that was the English and the British Empire, because they brought with them in their military conquest, they brought with them all of those cultural sensibilities. And so that's what I mean. What I mean is that ideas, whether we like it or not, ideas spread throughout the world via ways that sometimes may not be as pleasing to us, because that's just the legacy. That's the history of man. It's suffering and dying and petty squabbles, wars and conflicts, famine, genocide, all sorts of things have gone on. And so, when you hear these people, when they talk about, oh, America being evil and this wicked colonialism and it's this and this and that, and oftentimes you hear people talk about, what man means for evil, God means for good. And so part of the wickedness of colonialism is, it allowed for the spread of Christianity into parts of the world that hadn't received to that point the message of Christ. But yet and
Right.
still, that within that was rife with a ton of cultural clashes and conflicts that led to a lot of turmoil on the other hand. And
Right.
so it's not just this daisies and get what I'm saying? It's not just roads to straw. It's not an easy thing, because
Yeah.
the common denominator in all of this is still man.
Yeah. Somebody asked what your name is. This is Chuck
Oh,
Littleton. He goes by Teach 'em Chuck on YouTube and Instagram. Teach 'em Chuck, and he's with us every Sunday on Cutting Through the Culture. So, Chuck, the admittedly, one of the things that I think kind of caused me to analyze myself with a different perspective. I wouldn't say a different perspective, but I would say with a more biblical perspective in terms of like where I have been cutting up, was a video clip that I saw of one of these kind of pro-black Republicans who goes by the
mhm.
name of Hotep Jesus. Have you heard of this one?
I know exactly what Hotep Jesus is. And again, some people in the chat were like, well, what is a black conservative? Well, we're
Yeah.
kind of that's the thing. We're being like tongue in cheek a bit with the title, because we want to address and answer the question, because Chad and I both find this notion of a black Republican, we find it problematic. And I think a lot of people in the chat find it problematic as well. But I guess they kind of came in and were like, well, what does this mean? Why does it have to be black Republican? We're saying the same things, guys. That's what we're saying.
There you go.
But you gotta take time and listen, guys. We're
There you
on to
go.
something here. You just give us a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
But go
we
ahead.
do long form streaming over here. Um, so he said something, uh, and I noticed kind of this kind of mocking attitude that he had, and then we go into Sunday Nights Live, and I noticed some of the same things. But anyway, check this out.
Okay.
We had a bunch of people, a bunch, all run out here, specifically Detroit, right? In Detroit, you had a lot of people complain about being displaced by illegals. Detroit has a huge black population. In fact, I think Detroit was founded by a black man. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. Maybe that was Chicago. I don't even know.
Chicago.
But they were complaining. They were saying, yo, we're losing our jobs. We can't even get to the YMCA. We can't get to the community center. What do you think happens when a bunch of illegals are dumped into an area full of people with low-skilled jobs that require little to no education? They now have to compete with people who will work for less and live in a rented house with 10 other illegals for the cheap. Skimping. They said, we're not going to pay the blacks because the blacks want too much for their labor. It's not that blacks are lazy. You see, what they like to do is they like to say that blacks are lazy because they won't work for peanuts. No, that's called intelligence. That's not laziness. That's intelligence. Oh, you won't. Oh, the Hispanic man will work for peanuts, and yeah, he's working for peanuts because he's used to getting peanuts. He's used to getting pesos. He's used to living in a tin hut. And it's 20 of them sharing a one-bedroom apartment, 30 of them in one Honda Civic. They pull up to work. They hopping out the trunk, hopping out the back seat. This is who we competing with. You want me to pull up and work for illegal wages. That's called intelligence, not laziness. So you say it's laziness, but no, it's the fact that they don't want to pay black people what they're worth.
So, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack, and I know you want to get to it.
No, go ahead.
But I
It's a
mean,
lot. Go ahead. You can do your
one of the
thing.
things that stuck out to me is like, okay, now you are, and I'm going to be accused of caping for illegals again. I don't care, so be it at this point. Um, but again, it's like you can make your point without, on the one hand, belittling Mexicans, and then making them seem like down here, and then on the other hand, making blacks seem all the way up here. No, they're intelligent. So you're basically boosting black folks. Like, no, it's not intelligence. Like, we're going to get to that, I'm sure. But then too, like, oh, they're hopping out the truck. They're used to living in tin huts. They're like, okay, like you're unnecessarily and senselessly like belittling a huge swath of people. And I feel like as a Christian, I'll die on this hill. I don't care. Like, no, it doesn't make sense to senselessly dehumanize people. It just doesn't. Like, you can put me in a leftist category, a democratic category. You can put me in whatever category you want. I don't care. But I know that since my Lord and Savior didn't dehumanize people unnecessarily, so too won't I. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But I know I know some things stuck out to you in that, Chuck. Speak on it.
Well, I think that that speaks to your underlying point. Because when he said that blacks aren't lazy, that's called intelligence, and of course by default sounds to me like he's implying that Hispanic immigrants or even illegal aliens, whatever. He's implying that they're unintelligent, right? And so again, why I get your point. Why go there? So blacks are intelligent, Hispanics are willing to work for lower wages, and so that makes them, I suppose, unintelligent. But he says that again, he keeps they this and they this and they that. Again, what really bugs me is that when people discuss economics, which can be, a very it can be a very esoteric science. It's very multifaceted. It's very complex. But when he says, they won't pay, and they again, what industries are we talking about? What markets are we referring to? He says that, well, they don't want to pay back people what they're worth. Well, who is they? And of course, the person who's willing to depart with their property are the ones who determine the true value of a thing. When if in fact they're actually willing to pay for it, for whatever reason, someone may not be willing to pay for your labor. You live in a quote, well, not quote unquote, but well, yeah, we'll just say that you live in a quote unquote first world nation, right? Or at least you live in a core economic zone, right? To take a lot of the political substance out of the term, right? You live in a core economic zone or the cultural significance out of the term, right? And so, with that being said, that is in fact how economies grow in separate nations. Particularly, let's say, for example, in the United States, a core economic zone in the United States, they have to create better paying jobs so that they can continue in the act of the creation of high tech goods and services. So I guess my question is, Chad, and I know you said this before, why is it that blacks in this country, since they're so intelligent, and I will pose this question to Hotep Jesus, if blacks are in fact so intelligent, why in fact are they competing for low tech jobs with unskilled workers? Why aren't they, by and large, qualified to do things that someone is actually willing to pay them a higher wage for? Because that, of course, what a wage signifies, right? It's the price of your labor, because labor is the first thing to actually have a price. I think it was Adam Smith who said that. So again, there is no reason why, I mean, there's a reason why, but again, there is nothing, there is no, uh, again, I guess my question to him would be, why is it that blacks feel as though they are in the exact same market as the illegal alien? Is it due to systemic oppression? What is it, Chad? I mean, of course, they're not lazy, right? Wink, wink. Blacks aren't lazy. It's intelligence. So if they are so intelligent and they are so chock full of human capital, then why aren't they capable of doing something else? I don't understand.
No, I mean the thing is, like growing up, my parents used to say beggars can't be choosers, and that's I mean it's a cliched term at this point, but it I mean phrase I should say, but I mean it's true nonetheless. Politically, unfortunately, a lot of black folks are beggars, politically speaking, insofar that when you look at the so-called black vote and how by and large it goes to politicians who are promising that you're going to get something tangible out of my being in office. When you look at the civil rights movement and how rhetorically a lot of the civil rights leaders were begging, the fact is black culture has turned into a kind of begging type culture. And one of the things, I mean, people forget that the name of the March on Washington was the March for Jobs and Freedom. Is that what it was called,
Yeah.
Chuck?
Yeah. Hmm.
March for Jobs and
Yeah. Close
Freedom.
enough. Yeah. Yeah. That was the original. Yeah.
And so the whole idea is that like a job is going to fall out of the sky and you're going to take it. And no, that's not actually how that works. And so again, a lot of black folks were postured up as beggars. And so now that you have taken on that demeanor, politically speaking, now that that's part and parcel of your body politic, you're now trying to choose the kind of wages that you're going to get, and it just doesn't work that way. So to Chuck's point, you're competing for these low skill jobs, but you're wanting a higher wage for these low skill jobs because you've taken on this kind of sense of entitlement. Oh, I'm owed this job. Not only am I owed this job, but I'm owed a higher wage to do this job. It doesn't work. Like that's not reality. And so there's a chasm. There's a separation between the idealistic rhetoric of politicians and reality. And the fact is, a lot of us unfortunately vote for the idealism, but when we're faced with the reality, we call ourselves getting frustrated. And the fact is, again, a lot of these people who are coming over here and are willing to work for next to nothing, for
Mhm.
peanuts, as Hotep Jesus put it,
Right.
um, they understand that, look, if
Yes.
in order for me to hone my skills, I need to take this job. I need to build. I need to be frugal with my money. I need to be able to take care of my family. And ultimately, eventually, I'll get to where I'm trying to go. And so to me, that's
Exactly.
intelligence. That is
Exactly.
intelligence. Not walking around with a sense of entitlement, because you get nothing out of that except for on everybody's nerves. However, when you take this kind of humble posture and you are willing to work your way up the proverbial ladder, you will be rewarded for that. And that to
Mhm.
me is intelligence.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
again,
Well,
this concept of like, and you see it with the so-called pro-black Republicans, right? This willingness to go out of your way
mhm.
to make black folks seem way better or way more intelligent or way more cool or way more hip than what we actually are, and you
Mhm.
do so at the expense of everyone else who isn't black, in order to
Mhm.
like do what exactly? Like if that's your basis for winning people to your political ideology, then you're doing, like, what you're doing is in vain. You're building your structure on a faulty foundation, and it's not going to stand very long, because at the end of the day, unless and until you're changing the mindset of the people who are entitled and feel like they're owed something more than what they actually deserve, they're
Mhm.
going to, the chicken, they're going to come home to roost one day. Like, they're going to understand and realize, like, wait, I stopped voting Democrat and now I'm a Republican because the pro-black Republican convinced me to become one of them, but I'm still not getting
Right.
the things I think I deserve.
Yeah.
And so it
Right.
all
Right.
comes crashing down on you.
Yeah. And that's why, to go to the question of live again, I know we've talked about a lot. Conservatism it's not conservatism essentially is not about policy. It's about more. It's and this is why it is very difficult for anyone, a politician, to truly implement a conservative agenda from a policy point of view, because it sort of goes beyond that. One of my favorite, um, of course, it goes without saying, I've never met the man, but I truly admired his work, and his insights, his intelligence, his scholarship has taught me a lot. And that's the late Sir Roger Scruton. To me, I mean, prior to his death a couple of years ago, I don't know, he may have been, in my extremely humble opinion, just I mean, he was a true gem. Maybe the greatest living conservative in the world at the time, until he passed away. And I mean, again, I won't unpack his whole point of view on this whole notion of conservatism. But for any of you who are interested, I would encourage you to look into the writings and the ideas of Sir Roger Scruton. Um, you hit the nail on the head, Chad. You're not giving me the things that I thought I was going to get. When I listened to Hotep Jesus, when I listened to him, um, again, why is it unintelligent to take the wage that is being offered to you? Because that's what I mean. Essentially, I mean, that's what economics does. Not only does economics is not merely this abstraction, this sort of thing on the surface. What economics does is that it also communicates ideas amongst disparate human beings in this kind of a systematic way that doesn't always have to be articulated. And so, considering the fact that the resources that we have at our disposal are finite, and we use the pricing system to regulate that, what we as human beings do is that we curtail our life choices and the decisions that we make around the reality of economics, so that we can navigate the rough terrain of life in a way that doesn't bring about a ton of undue suffering. He said, or perhaps suffering that one isn't willing to deal with. What I mean, and that's what freedom is all about, right? It's about trade-offs, choices, not relying upon surrogate decision makers, i.e., public intellectuals, to decide for you what is in your best interests. Um, what you simply want to demand a higher wage because you have certain standards, you want to live a certain way, you want to make certain decisions, and so you feel as though you are owed a higher share of someone else's property because you feel as though, as a black person or as whatever kind of a person, that I deserve to live in this kind of house, I deserve to be able to take care of this or that, or I deserve to drive this sort of car and whatever. And I'm saying to myself, where do you get this notion? Where do you get this kind of arbitrary cutoff line to where you say, as a person, I am not willing to live below this standard? I mean, says who? At the expense of someone, a share of someone else's property, right? That they aren't willing to part with in exchange for your services because they can get it cheaper somewhere else. That's just basic. That's just basic economics. Change the way you live. Live in a certain way, right? So that you can afford the things that you need for subsistence based upon the wages that you earn for the labor that you perform. And then eventually, as you mentioned, Chad, you work your way up. If you got to live, I don't care if you, I mean, I shoot, man. I mean, even prior to, before there was a welfare system, in the United States, immigrants coming over, you had, two generations, and of folks living in a small, living quarters, laying, feet to head and piling up in the bed, and eventually, right. Those circumstances change quite drastically in less than a generation because that's what free market economics can do. If you were to take all of the illegal aliens and just deport them immediately, or even take the legal immigrants and just deport them immediately, what if entrepreneurs, capitalists, right? What if they still say, nah, we aren't willing to kind of give you what you want or what you feel as though you deserve, quote unquote. No, we're not going to give you that. What is a Hotep Jesus willing to do then? I mean, is he willing to go to the state and demand that they, right, pay the worker their fair share? Again, I think that's the whole point of you bringing up that clip. Again, this is, I mean, someone in Hotep. Again, not trying to pile on Hotep Jesus. I don't know the guy. I don't follow his content. Especially I know who he is, but again, I think that's the point that you're trying to make, is that we're beginning to kind of blur the line where socialism in all of its different iterations is almost becoming like the backdrop of American thought, whether a person considers themselves to be liberal or conservative. It's very troubling. It's very troubling because I mean, what what do you expect, an employer to do, and who should come in to fix it? I mean, again, I don't know. I guess protect the borders, leave the aliens out, keep the illegals out, keep the foreigners out, and then all of a sudden things will all of a sudden magically become better for Black folks. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think the labor is the labor, the price is the price, and I think what will eventually happen is Blacks are going to bump themselves down to, I guess, the lower tier, the tier of they're practically unemployable, because the price is the price. They'll just find someone else who was a native born citizen who is willing to do the work for the price that is being offered. So they'll just completely wipe Blacks off the table. There's no, again, magic way to fix this problem, according to the way Hotep Jesus sees it. I don't see it working that way.
Exactly. Listen, folks. Two things can be true at once. Um, and on the one hand, while I acknowledge the fact that we need to close the borders, that we need to build walls and this, that, and the third, and we need to make our immigration system uh, uh, better and more stringent. While I do agree with that, and while I'm willing to admit that readily, at the same time, I acknowledge the fact that most of y'all complaining about immigration don't really have anything going for yourselves to begin with. You haven't utilized the opportunities in this country to make yourselves entrepreneurs, to pick yourselves up by your bootstraps, and you're just complaining about stuff or people who are actually doing the things to take advantage of the opportunities that you refuse to take advantage of. I'll say it. And so it'll kind of be the same as, like, I have 4 kids, right? And let's say they were lazy, they weren't doing everything I asked them to do, they were basically entitled. And then I go and I adopt a kid, and he comes and he's obedient, he's listening to everything that I say, he's cleaning up after himself, this, that, and the third, and he's being rewarded as a result of this. Of course, my kids will be bitter at the fact that, like, you're treating him better, this, that, and the third. It's like, no, he's doing what he's asking to do, and he's being rewarded for it. So I'm going to say the same thing to my kids as I'll say to you. I mean, the thing is, like, you need to take advantage of these opportunities and stop moaning and complaining. Um,
Yeah,
so,
do what you got to do, man. I do chat again. I know that there's an economic component, right? There's a cultural component. Of course, and I know, like I said, Chad, maybe because I know you, I have the cheat sheet. I know that you understand and recognize and realize that, you know, the whole issue of assimilation is not trivial, right? I mean, there needs to be, once upon a time, I mean, we would slow roll. I mean, there were times in American history where we completely shut immigration down because we needed to give the folks that had come into the country time to assimilate. We cannot have just rapid folks coming in. Again, this is set the economics aside. I just feel the need to say that, because people will,
right.
probably inevitably accuse us of not addressing that or looking at that. American culture is sort of being diluted because we have too many people importing foreign values into the country. I mean, again, like you said, Chad, two things can, in fact, be true. I think you and I are both completely opposed to, any form of illegal uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, immigration. Again,
100%.
but there's a way to go about doing this. But the fact of the matter is, I think, just to go back to the clip, I do not think illegal immigration is the primary problem. That's not the issue confronting Black Americans. Even from an economic standpoint, even from having the ability to find a job, that's not the key issue that is holding them back or putting this barrier in front of them. That's not the problem. That's not the first problem. Again, you and I are both opposed to mass illegal immigration. Hey, I'm opposed to mass legal immigration. Again, I think it should be slowed down drastically. Again, we don't have time to go back and unpack the Hart-Celler Act. Again, totally different show. But yeah, man, that's not black. That's not your issue. That's not the issue. Black, white, or otherwise, that's not the issue.
So, in light of this, like, what is a black conservative? And so that's question number one. And question number two is, do you think this so-called black conservative uh, is has the right answers for facing the issues of the 21st century Western civilization?
You want me to answer that, or
Yeah.
you? No, unfortunately, I'm no, because and I know that I'm stereotyping. I'm putting everybody in a huge, you know lumping a bunch of people together. But I don't know if social media, just kind of made it to where people were more readily identified or easy to identify. I think that just there's and again I've noticed this, since Donald Trump, and again this may seem a bit simplistic, but I think again it just speaks to the cult of personality that is Donald Trump. Not trying to bash Trump because like you, Chad, I voted for him in previous elections and I plan to vote for him again. But I think this just speaks to the cult of personality that is Donald Trump. In that, I believe that a lot of people kind of took to what they perceived to be conservative as a kind of knee-jerk reaction to what they felt Donald Trump represented, which was this huge middle finger to the quote unquote powers that be. And so, and again, I'm not dismissing that completely because I understand it. You know, I get it in our political class. If you want to create a class out of them, you know, have again, we got problems, right? There are a ton of problems, but again, um, you know, no matter what, you know, you can't take shortcuts, and you can't, you know, go about trying to fix the issue in ways that sort of don't work, because you're simply in a knee jerk sort of way responding to things that you find displeasurable or displeasing, but you don't really know how to really address the issue. You don't really know what is actually taking place. You just know that you're sick and tired of the rainbow flags. You know, you're sick and tired of the high taxes and the car and all of that stuff. And again, you know, I get it. But you know, oftentimes, to bring it back full circle, Chad, is that the changes that we want to see in society, of course, it begins with the individual. It begins with the person in the mirror, right? Because, you know, of course, as I forgot who famously said it, but you know, our constitutional system, or our representative republic, which is why we don't have a direct democracy, was created for a virtuous people. And I don't know if a lot of black conservatives are stressing that point enough, because, like their opponents on the left, um, there's too much of an emphasis on the role of government. There's too much of an emphasis on the role of the state. And there's too much of a cult of personality centered around Donald Trump, to where I don't know where the quote unquote black conservative will be in the next 4, 5, 6 years. Are you willing to do the hard part? Are you willing to actually, right, to do the work? Are you actually willing to, you know, leaving conservatism in the hands of, you know, quote unquote, you know, black conservatives or whatever? I don't have a huge ton of faith in it, because I think a lot of people just simply jumped on to this bandwagon in the wake of the shifting and changing political and cultural landscape that was created, you know, by the political ascendancy of Donald Trump. And I just don't know if people really know what is at stake, and know what is going on, and actually, you know what's taking place in a way that they can actually do something about it when he's gone. I just don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody in the comments section said that they, I think it was actually started showing up, but somebody said that irrespective of black conservative or whomever, she doesn't feel like anybody has answers to how to address the problems that ails the 21st century Western civilization. Would you agree with that? Like, who do you think has the right answers?
Man, well, I mean, I don't know if it's no any one person. I mean, you know, again, it's weird, man. You know, we talk
Well, not
about
one person, but like I guess group, or organization or party or faction or entity, or who do
mm,
you think?
I mean, maybe this is another live, but I mean, you know, we talk about the MAGA movement, and you know, I'm against this whole uh, again,
And
this
by
the
the way,
very
somebody said you didn't answer the question of what is a black conservative. So
uh,
circle back to that too when you get a chance.
okay. Yeah, you know, again, you know, this whole idea of populism, and I don't like this idea of a ruling class, or this kind of a ruling elite, because it's like you're drawing this kind of connection to your political adversaries, seemingly on the left, they appear to be. Again, that's what we mean when we use the term populism. I mean, that is essentially what defines it. I'm not one of these people that wants to just go out and just turn the system upside down simply for the sake of doing so, because those who have ran our institutions for so long have just corrupted them, beyond beyond repair. And so it is our job to just completely overhaul everything. I just, again, I mean, maybe that's just inevitable. I mean, perhaps we don't have any other choice. Perhaps we've reached the end of our uh, the end of the road as a country. I'm not willing to accept that just yet. But again, I don't think that the MAGA movement necessarily has all of the answers, because there are a ton of different ideas and perspectives kind of all cobbled into this, right, to this group of folk, and I just don't know exactly what the overall mission or voice of the entire sort of MAGA movement is, because there are a lot of people who wave the flag and the banner of MAGA, who I think have ideas that are at worst abhorrent, and at best just whimsical and ridiculous. So again, Chad, I don't know. I don't know if there's any one group that has the right I
Do
mean,
you think that's the right question to ask?
maybe not, and that's why it's so hard to really to ask it and really get to the bottom of it. And maybe that's not the right question to ask.
And I think that's kind of the spirit of what drove my comments on last Sunday. I had to keep
Mhm.
taking it back to that, but it's like it's not a
Mhm.
question of what's who, which group has the right answer. It's really a question of what must one do in the
Yeah,
face of everything that's going on.
because I'm not lost on that. What is a black conservative? I haven't forgotten, but it reminds me of something else, Chad. Not last week's show, but the show before. Somebody had made put something in the comment section, and I think that they were addressing me specifically. And I didn't even answer them. I just read it and I didn't answer them. But another thing that I'm so sick and tired of, and it's kind of in the spirit of your question, I think, because I've been asked this, I've been told this, I've been criticized. Because people always say, well, and I know you get this as well. People say, you don't understand. You're making everything black and white, and no pun intended. That wasn't some double entendre. I'm just saying, you make it too simple. Right? You overly simplify things. You're not taking into account how this happened and how that happened and this happened during racism and that happened and that. And people accuse me. They've probably accused you of being too overly you overly simplify everything. Even though if you were to go to my YouTube channel and sift through my content, I don't oversimplify anything. If anything, I am an over explainer, as you can see right now. But at the end of that criticism, people have asked me or said to me, well, you say all of this, but you don't offer any solutions. Well, when are we going to stop complaining, and when are we going to start offering up solutions? And my thing, Chad, is that why is it? And I guess I'm gonna ask you, if you agree with me and feel the way I feel. Why is it up to me? I don't know you. I don't know what you want out of life. I don't know what your talents are, your goals are, your ambitions. I have no idea what you want out of life. Why is it up to me to offer solutions to you or for a masses of people to whom I have no intimate connection with? Why is it that Chad or me or Keisha or Bless or anybody has to offer you a solution? You know precisely what it is that you need to do. You either do it or you don't. I don't have to offer a solution up to fix the issues of the Black community. The Black community or the individuals within the Black community know precisely what they need to do. It's just that the individuals within the Black community, for reasons, don't feel as though they have to or may not have the will to, or whatever the case may be. But you know what you have to do. You know the
Right.
answer. I don't have to tell you anything. And if I point out the problems, if I point out what's going on in the world, then that's it. Nothing else needs to be said. You react to the information, right? And you, right, you again, you just react to it the best way you know how, and just again, I don't understand why people feel the need to ask me or ask you for solutions. It's the silliest thing ever to me. I just don't get that.
Right.
I just
No.
don't get that. Because you, Chad, you're supposed to fix Black America. You're supposed to fix America by and large. I don't get that. To me, that's just a bad faith way of, bad faith actor just simply trying to discount the information that you bring forward because you're simply in the business of trying to tear people down, let them tell it. Because it's your job to, of course, build them back up if you really care about people. Uh, I hate that. I hate that. It really gets under my skin.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I mean, and to me, I think it's quite troubling that this whole like people approach politics as this kind of fix all
Mm,
thing to begin with. This
right.
idea that I'm going to vote for this because that's the thing. I think and Thomas Sowell said something of this nature that there is no such thing as a how did he word it, that there's no such thing as an easy answer. And
Yeah.
of course, I
Exactly.
know some of you might be thinking of, oh, there's no such thing as solutions, there are only trade-offs. Yes, I'm aware of that quote, but he said something else too, which is like there is no such thing as an easy answer. And I think people try to look in politics for an easy answer to the problems that they're faced with on a daily basis. When reality is like, no, life is more complicated than an easy answer or easy fix that some politician can give you. And I believe that 100%. Like, no, in two, it's not so much that they're only looking for an easy answer. They're looking for something that doesn't require them to do work, something that doesn't require them to
Mhm.
put in the work or the effort to get what it is they wish to achieve. And this is it goes back to what you were saying. Like, I don't know you. I don't know what you want out of life. I don't know. Like the thing is, like, success is a subjective word because the success for one man
Yes.
might be different than success for another
Yes,
man. Do you want to be a CEO
exactly.
somewhere, or do you want to live in the woods in a log cabin fishing every day? It's really a matter of what it is you want out of life. And so again, when it comes to the issues at all society, and I agree, like I don't even think that like who has the answer is the right question to ask, because the fact
Mhm.
is we all want different things out of life, and so the question should be, what must one do? Which governing system is the most conducive to human flourishing? And I think that's the question that the founding fathers were wrestling with, and
Yeah. And I think
and
that's
to
the
their
question.
right. And to their
But
credit, I think they came up with the closest thing to a system or a governing system that allows for human flourishing. But it could only work if people have a kind of meritocratic view of government, where the government stays out of people's way and people kind of like they rise or they fall, they succeed or they succeed or they fail. Based on what it is they do, what kind of work they put in. But to create all these safety nets, to create all these policies and these bureaus and all these different programs and organizations under the government, so as to try to make life more equitable for the most amount of people. It's to the extent that you do that you create more and more problems, more and more issues, which leads Chuck and Chad in 2024 asking the question, who has the answers to fix the
right.
issues that we face? When the reality is,
Mhm.
the reason why we face all these issues is because we are under a government run amok. It
Yeah.
just is what it is. So as
Yeah.
far as black conservatives, black Republicans are concerned, did you have any other comments to that before
Yes.
I'm going to
I
play this
mean,
one last clip and then
no.
we can call it a day.
Yeah, that was excellent, man. Because you and I, man. I mean, we could literally probably talk for 24 hours straight, and we're not going to subject people to that nonsense. Nah, you're right, man. And I know this isn't all black conservatives. It isn't. You know what I mean? And we mean people who claim to be conservatives who are of the so-called black race. And unfortunately, and a lot of the leading black conservatives, some of your more popular ones over social media, they simply want to use the mechanisms of government to implement what they deem a conservative agenda, which of course is a contradiction because, as I mentioned earlier, conservatism, when properly understood, is not about policy at all. And so that's where you have a huge problem, and I think it's embodied in. I see a lot of people cheering the fact, and this may spark an idea in your mind, Chad, so I apologize. But when people say, for example, I see a lot of people on social media, Trump supporters, whatever, on YouTube and stuff like that, and they're happy at the fact that a lot of blacks are coming over to Trump because they see Trump as being a victim of the system, the same way in which they view themselves. And so they're happy at this. But at the same time, and heck, I want Trump to get as many votes as he can get because if I'm voting for him, he's a guy I want to win, right? Goes without saying. But what these conservative personalities, they're so fixated on getting Trump reelected. And again, I get it. I want him to get reelected as well. But when they talk about how the black community is starting to identify with Trump because they see Trump as being a victim of the system, the same way in which they are, they don't differentiate between what is happening to Trump and what has happened to the black community and what is happening to the black community today. By and large, you can have a perception that Trump is being put upon by the system like you, but the reality is you're not. Right? We can look at the individual case of Donald Trump and say, well, that's wrong what they're doing to him with these trumped up bogus charges. But the conservative on social media, the black Republican on social, and even some non-black conservative Republicans on social media won't make it a point to tell black folks, no, you're not. What's happening to Trump is not what is happening to you. But they'll keep the lie alive. They'll keep the myth going so long as they think that this can keep at least a small portion of Black America on the side of Donald Trump, even though this idea that black folks are being put upon is not true. You got many of Republican conservatives, black Republicans and conservatives who just won't say it. And so to me, that's a huge problem for me because black
Right.
folks aren't being victimized by the system. That's a lie. It's a
Yeah.
lie. No, you're not like Trump. That's a lie. But they won't say it.
um. So yeah, I reject this whole idea of there being a black Republican or a black conservative, because to me, like, hold on real quick. Yeah. What do you need, baby? Okay, baby. I'll be there in a minute, okay? I'll get it for you in a minute. Go ahead. Go on.
You say it's been 2 hours. I need that tablet. I'm t- I gave you 2 hours, Daddy. I played like you said.
Hey, I don't have it
Tablet
yet.
time.
I don't have it. Go on. Yeah, go get it in the closet. Um. So yeah, I mean, I don't buy the whole black Republican, black conservative thing just because it's like, I mean, the whole idea of putting black in front of Republican or black in front of conservative, I think is it perpetuates this notion, to your point, that there is problems that black folks have in conservatism as the answer, or there's problems that black folks have in republicanism as the answer.
Republicans.
And so it basically it gives a kind of nod to the issues that specifically target black folks that Democrats and the left claim exist. And so what do I mean by that? Well, if you go to any black Republican summit or conference or whatever the case may be, you'll see that they agree with Democrats, with the left, about history. You see with that they agree with them about, some of the things that are troubling the urban community that are systemic and so on and so forth. You see that they agree with the problem. They just disagree when it comes to the solution. Hence the word black Republican. I believe that Republicans have the answers to the issues. And you saw Trump even acknowledge a lot of this. You know what I mean? Well, he didn't acknowledge. You see Trump using some of the rhetoric that
Uh-huh.
presumes that there's certain issues that black folks have that makes us targeted by the system.
Yeah.
Um,
And he's a
and I just
politician,
reject that.
Chad. That's the problem.
Right.
He's a
Right.
politician, so he's going to feed into that. This is the oh, go ahead, Chad. No, but can you hear me, Chad? I don't know if you mute, but that's. I mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to make that point that yeah, Donald Trump is doing what a politician does. And then if he's saying what he thinks he needs to say in order to placate that small part of the electorate, and then when he actually gets into office, he doesn't do anything for them, and then right there'll be this pushback or this uprising on behalf of the small black electorate. That's a portion of the electorate that is black that supported him. But of course, as a politician, I mean, what is he going to say? Is he going to say things that push potential voters away from him, even if he, doesn't believe that blacks have separate issues that Republicans can solve? Even if he doesn't believe that, will he say it? And so, it's just like, how do you know when a politician is lying, right? Their lips are moving. And then you have the, Tim Scott types, and it's just a whole mess, right? So,
Right.
they're
So
like they're going to buy into it, which again just speaks to what I've said, that politics is not it's not the answer.
one of the biggest issues, and we're about to wrap it up after this, but one of the biggest pet peeves of mine, if you will, is some of the talking points of black Republicans. I wanted you to get your thoughts on this clip.
You're going to tell them that, yeah, wasn't it? Well, they say, well, the Republican Party is the party of old white men. It ain't coming off. And while we're on that subject, wasn't it the Republican Party that fought a war to free the slaves? How many Jim Crow laws were passed by Republicans? Wasn't it the Republicans who ended Jim Crow? Then you can take it even further and say, so you're a Democrat. Why are you a Democrat? You know the Democrats were the ones that were in favor of slavery. They were the ones in favor of the Confederacy. They were the ones that created Jim Crow. They are the ones that made the laws, and they are the ones that fought like hell to keep them until they found out a different way to enslave people. Instead of giving them welfare, instead of giving them slave shacks and shackles, they decided they were going to give them welfare checks and the ghetto. You see, there are truths that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it, and you should too. You should run and go tell the good news of why you're a Republican.
Again, like I've said in the past, Chad, people have come to me and told me that I should. Can you imagine me running for office? Oh my goodness! I know you've been told that you should, Chad. You should run for your local,
Heck no. I couldn't do
state
that.
house.
I couldn't do that at all. What that guy was
No,
doing, sorry, I couldn't do
hey,
it.
because I would use the bully pulpit to you know to not maybe perhaps not give a sermon, but I think you get my point. Is to kind of give folks, by and large, not just blacks, but just in general. You know what I mean? Give them the moral kind of a tongue lashing that they need, and to let them know that I mean, why would a politician stand up there and give off the appearance that they are redundant, right? That they aren't needed, that you don't need to rely upon me. It's sort of it's counterintuitive. At least it's counterintuitive to the I don't necessarily want to say survival, but for lack of better terms, yes, the survival of the politician, at least in terms of the way people perceive their or evaluate their importance. To get up there and tell them, hey, man, don't ask me for a doggone thing. Here's what you need to do. And how about you? I mean, I wrote this down here when he said keep them in ghettos and give them welfare checks and so on and so forth. Again, nobody strapped you down and made you take a welfare check. No one turned your community into a quote unquote ghetto. All sorts of
Right.
people coming to the United States from, various parts of Europe were confined to the ghetto, but they didn't remain there. Again, and I know, we get tired of the same old talking points. Much of them are true about, the Republican Party doing X, Y, and Z. But again, you don't hear about the extra constitutional measures that the Republican legislature took in the wake of the Civil War, the outright attack on their political enemies, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. I mean, there were a ton of things. For crying out loud, we talk about a lot of Republicans or conservatives today are on this whole anti-Marxism kick. But point of fact that Karl Marx himself, during that time, would write up a propaganda for the North and for the cause of abolition in the United States. Karl Marx was, he supported the North, and he would write up again, propaganda for the North and disseminate them throughout. And a lot of Karl Marx's writings and pamphlets made their way to the United States. It's a very little known fact about Karl Marx. And so I guess a broken clock is right twice a day, or is it? I mean, I don't know. Should there have been a war to end slavery? Again, Chad, I know this is you and me right here. So, we always go come with the crazy provocative take. So that's a whole nother show. But yeah, man, just
Right.
weird, just a lot of weird, silly, like you said, talking points. Because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, what now? What now? The Democrats did this. The Democrats supported, Democrats and the KKK, and Republicans are the ones who passed, the civil rights legislation. And so, okay, but what? I, I don't know, man. Vote for Republicans, and then what? No more of that. No more welfare. What a Republican politician in whatever capacity that they function in order for them to really pull back and really to do away and quite frankly eradicate a lot of the legislative measures that have been taken by the by the left. um that would really place again more and more responsibility upon the citizenry. And so again, is this the message that Republican politicians are trying to impart to would be black voters? Of course not, because if you tell them what it is that they need to hear, you're going to offend them. And again, this is just another part of the reason why black folks don't vote Republicans, because they're racist or they're insensitive or they're insensitive or they are the black mouthpieces for white supremacy and so on. And so what do you do?
No, I listened to that speech and it's like, I don't know. Like I've heard it all before. I've heard it since 1998, and I'm not convinced that you have the answer, sir. I just don't. I'm not. And so, and the thing is like, to your point, a lot of what he's saying is true, but there's actually more to the story
Mhm.
than that. And not
Yeah.
only that, I mean, again, like, yes, I have never voted for a Democrat. And it just so happens that in a two-party system, all the people that I voted for happen to have ran as Republicans. Like, okay, so I acknowledge that. But at the same time, like, I'm not so enthusiastic and such a cheerleader for the Republican Party that I'm willing to lie and say that the Democrats had nothing to do with the ending of Jim Crow, or that they had nothing to do with, you know what I'm saying? Because it's actually more complex than that. It really is. Like, there were liberal Democrats who were trying to fight Jim Crow and were successful at doing so before Martin Luther King came onto the scene. You know what I mean? There were Republicans who were for Jim Crow. Like, what are we talking about? It's actually more complex than the narratives that were told. And I know that we all like to simplify things. We like to simplify the past and make it this kind of easy to obtain thing to where you can shape the minds of the youth and basically motivating them to either support or reject a certain cause. And this is what we do as historians. I shared a video, I don't know if you saw it earlier, Chuck, of this young black man, or this black kid. He's wearing a Kamala Harris and Joe Biden hat and Joe Biden shirt. You didn't see that? I sent it to the
No,
group chat.
not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
But this kid, he is sitting there, and he's basically talking about how Donald Trump is the worst president this country has ever had, about how, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the most effective administration this country has ever had. And of course, the reason why he's saying these things isn't because he has real knowledge of these things being true. Rather, it's because he has been indoctrinated and trained to believe that these things are true. He doesn't know the slightest thing about the history of presidents or
Exactly.
or anything of that nature. But yet he's sitting up there and hold on, I think I have it right here. Okay, here it
Okay.
is.
Y'all, I can't do it anymore. I think I'm going crazy. Stop voting for third-party candidates. They can't win, and they only make the Republicans win, and Democrats lose. I can't stress this enough. We now have a Republican Supreme Court because you guys voted third party in 2016. Is 2016 not enough proof? Because now the Donald Trump Supreme Court destroyed Roe v. Wade, destroyed affirmative action, and now we have this presidential immunity thing that... Stop voting third party. Seriously. Now, 2024, new year. Okay, we have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, most effective administration, American history. JoeBiden.com/accomplishments if you care to learn about what he's done, by the way. I can't stress it enough. Stop voting third party. How about this? I'll make a deal. Vote third party in 2028. Do it. But 2024 is too important. Project 2025, everything is on the line. Just please. And this is not a paid ad, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Yeah, man. I'm not
He
even
kinda-
gonna
he
say
kinda-
that, man. It'd be child abuse.
he kind of
I'm not
favored
even
you a
gonna.
little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, like my son. I'm gonna put him over my knee. I'm not even gonna say that'd be child abuse, man.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, and,
Donald
and,
Trump
and you're right, it
Supreme
will.
Court.
It'll
Yeah,
be fish in the barrel.
every time you go third party, it always benefits the Republicans, right? Like it benefited Bush in '92. Stop it.
Yeah,
But
kid,
again,
go
yeah,
go
he
go
doesn't know
eat a
anything
popsicle
about
somewhere.
presidential. Right? He doesn't know anything about presidential history, right? He probably doesn't even know who Ross Perot is.
Exactly,
Anyway,
exactly. And so again, like, but the thing is, he's confident enough to get on social media, decked out with his Kamala Harris, Joe Biden hat, shirt, bracelet, everything he had on, because he has embraced a simplified version of American history and a simplified narrative of the Trump administration juxtaposed to the Biden administration. And so I'm using that just as an example of like how, that kid is guilty of what most American adults are guilty of, namely embracing the simplified version of history that's actually far more complex than what we like to admit. Anyway, I'll give you the last word. Well, before I do that, let's see here. Thank you to Miss Ree for the super chat. She says, have an awesome day to my CTTC family. We'll watch later tonight. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And
he
also,
thought it was
thank
funny.
you. Sorry?
I said she thought it was Sunday.
Oh, gotcha. And then let's see, super chat from Willie Doc. Appreciate the live. We'll catch the replay. Thank you, Willie Doc. Appreciate it. Anyway, what are your final words on this topic? I know we covered a
Man,
lot.
yeah, we covered a lot because Chad, for the audience, Chad and I have been trying to do. Man, it seemed like it's been months. He and I have been trying to do a live. Every time we get something finalized, something comes up at the last minute. He's busy, I'm busy, and so that's why this live lasted so long because there's so much that he and I have been wanting to discuss with one another, and we've been really trying to save it for a live. So final thoughts, man. I mean, like I said, we did cover a lot. I think that and again, I wanted to have this conversation with you because I wanted to unpack this idea of a Christian culture. Just those two words, led to a 3 hour long live stream, or 2.5, 3 hours, however long it's been. Um, but I'll just say that the people who, and I've said this before, I think on one of my YouTube videos or something, the people that came before us, I mean, there were people with some great ideas, there were folks with not so great ideas. But the bottom line is, human beings, I mean, we had struggles back then. We hadn't figured everything out, and we're still struggling with these same questions. And the people who come after us, I mean, they will still deal with these same issues, because I think that and that's the whole meaning, right? That's the whole point of human existence, and the tragedy. It isn't so much that whatever mankind does, he is destined to fail. But in this finite life, we as human beings, we make choices, and of course, you make a choice at the expense of something else, and so we learn how to deal uh, with that. When we mature and when we reach a kind of spiritual maturity to where we can actually, deal with the consequences of trying of uh, having to make a hard choice. Um, I forgot who said it, but I wish I could give them credit. But I think I read this somewhere. But it says something about, and they were speaking about philosophers when they said this. But I think it just applies in general. But it talked about, the person said something about philosophers, not so much knowing how to solve problems, or the goal is to solve a problem. The goal is, in fact, to identify a problem and learning how to live with that problem. Doesn't mean that you just sit around and you just, let things just go to heck. But at a certain point, we have to realize that, as man, we just haven't, and we will never have everything figured out. The best we can hope for is that we can relegate certain things that we find displeasurable to a level that is tolerable, and simply learn how to deal with it, to learn how to deal with the pain, to learn how to deal with the suffering, because God has already worked it out, right? He's already solved it. And so just learn how to deal with the suffering and the pain. And in due time, I promise you, it'll all be worth it. Because when you try to put forth the effort to try to fix everything in one big fell swoop, you just end up making a mess out of everything, man. And I think that's almost the lesson of human history, is that human beings, we F stuff up. You know what I mean? No matter what, a kid. And I know, like I said, I know we talked about a lot, and so I guess I just wanted to leave the people with that message, and yeah, man. Hope
Cool,
hope
cool.
hope it meant something to you, because yeah, man, that's all I got.
Cool,
That's
cool.
all I
Well,
got,
thank
man.
y'all for rocking with us today, and thank you all who left super chats. Really appreciate it. Chuck, stay on real quick. I gotta tell you something real quick. Y'all have a good
Cool,
night.
cool.
Thank y'all.
Peace out.